Chapter 416. One must know that the dragon scare drum was similar to a beacon tower. Whenever the dragon scare drum sounded, the 5 divine generals closest to the island had to immediately put down whatever they were doing and rush over to check on the situation as quickly as possible. However, after Divine General Qin Yang's inspection, he discovered that although the output of the dragon's vein was low, it was far from the level where the dragon scare drum was sounded. What was this? In ancient times, there was King Yu of Zhou toying with the warlords with the beacon fire, and now there was Fu Anqing toying with the divine general with the dragon scare divine general. One could only imagine how furious divine General Qin Yang was at this moment. At this time, Fu Anqing also discovered that the dragon's vein was fine, so he instantly knew that he had gotten himself into big trouble today. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged divine General Qin Yang with a terrified expression. "Divine General, please forgive me. This matter is indeed this old man's oversight. It's just that there really was something wrong with the dragon's vein a few days ago, causing us to be unable to cultivate smoothly." At this point, Fu Anqing could not help but look at the dragon's vein with a puzzled expression before continuing to defend himself. To tell you the truth, just before we sounded the dragon scare drum, this old man had specially sent someone to verify it. Who would have thought? The dragon scare drum had just sounded, and the dragon's vein returned to normal. Before he finished speaking, Fu Anqing looked like he wanted to cry, but had no tears. Even if he had 10 times the courage, he would not dare to casually make fun of the divine general. The goddamn dragon's vein. This time, he was really in deep trouble. Even in a society ruled by law, false police reports could be detained, let alone in a feudal society with a strict hierarchy like Tiandu. Therefore, Fu Anqing's defense did not have any effect. Divine General Qin Yang could not be bothered to talk nonsense with him. With a wave of his hand, he ordered his men to send Fu Anqing to the death row. This was a critical period, and everyone in Tiandu was extremely tense. Therefore, the matter of Fu Anqing sounding the dragon scare drum could only be investigated later. Subsequently, Divine General Qin Yang warned the people of Purple Jade Peak, then turned and flew back to the floating island where Tiandu was located. Seeing this, Chunxi immediately followed, turning into a stream of light and sticking closely behind Divine General Qin Yang. Divine General Qin Yang was only at the Yuanying stage, so he naturally didn't notice that there was a tail behind him. Therefore, Chunxi, led by Divine General Qin Yang, passed through the formation and smoothly arrived at the core of the macro world, Tiandu Dragon Head Peak. There was a very powerful array around the Dragon Head Peak, which was also one of the reasons why Chunxi did not dare to get too close to it. With Divine General Qin Yang paving the way, Chunxi was naturally able to barge in very easily. And the reason why Chunxi's infiltration was so smooth was not because the defensive power of Tiandu was so weak, but mainly because, ever since the Grand Pure Saint Ancestor established the heavenly capital, the Dragon Head Peak had been a forbidden area in the entire Great World. Who would dare to sneak in without permission? This was a path of no return. However, Chunxi did not consider whether it was dangerous at all. Instead, he resolutely barged in. As soon as he entered the array, Chunxi discovered that the spirit qi on the Dragon Head Peak was exceptionally rich, several times richer than the outside world. It was comparable to the heart-cleansing spirit spring in the forbidden area of the back mountain of the sky, Yin Divine Sect. This place, in addition to the rich spirit qi, Chunxi also discovered that the interior of the array was filled with an extremely unusual energy fluctuation. Chunxi had never seen such a fluctuation before, so he frowned and sensed for a while before a guess gradually formed in his mind. This strange energy fluctuation, could it be from the soul mirror? At this thought, Chunxi did not care if he had recovered to his peak state and immediately followed Divine General Qin Yang to the core area of the Dragon Head Peak. The core area of the Dragon Head Peak was naturally the core area of the entire macro world, the Lingxiao Imperial Palace. Chunxi silently followed behind Divine General Qin Yang. But before he could see the palace, Divine General Qin Yang had already landed on the ground and walked along a small path to the peak. Instead of flying, he insisted on walking. Divine General Qing Yang's strange behavior was completely due to the rules of Heaven Capital since ancient times. The Dragon Head Peak was the head of the 120,000 floating islands, and the Imperial Palace was located at the peak of the Dragon Head Peak. Therefore, apart from the 10 heavenly venerables, no one could be above the Imperial Palace. Not even a divine general. Chunshi obediently followed behind Divine General Qing Yang and walked all the way to the peak of the mountain. As soon as he reached the peak of the mountain, his vision suddenly opened up, following which Chunshi discovered that the peak of the Dragon Head Peak was extremely flat, as if someone had used a sword to flatten it. At the same time, a huge palace that spanned across the peak of the mountain entered Chenshi's eyes. This is the Imperial Palace? The Imperial Palace spanned across the peak of the Dragon Head Peak, and the first impression it gave was that it was majestic and magnificent. However, Chunshi didn't even have time to carefully observe the Imperial Extreme Hall in front of him. His attention was completely attracted by the plaza at the entrance of the hall. This was a huge plaza that was comparable in size to the Zhonghai Gymnasium. There seemed to be some kind of activity going on in the plaza, and there were actually many people sitting cross-legged there. At a rough count, there were at least a few thousand people. However, although there were many people in the plaza, it wasn't enough to make Chunshi stop and look. What he really cared about it was that copper mirror that was floating in the middle of the plaza and constantly emitting divine light. In an instant, 10,000 years in a glance. The moment Chunshi saw this Dharma treasure, the name of this Dharma treasure suddenly jumped out from the bottom of his heart. Sky-bearing technique, floating dawn mirror. Chunshi silently sized up the soul mirror in front of him. The soul mirror was constantly shining with divine light, and an unknown energy wave was constantly circulating around it. With one look, one could tell that such a phenomenon was definitely not ordinary. However, in front of a supreme treasure, Chunshi couldn't help but feel a sense of disgust, and he couldn't help but want to smash it into pieces. It was this stupid mirror. It was the one that caused his family to be separated, and he almost lost his family. Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but have a murderous look in his eyes, and he couldn't help but want to take it away on the spot. However, just as Chunshi was about to do something evil, an old man sitting cross-legged in the middle of the hall seemed to have noticed something, and then he suddenly opened his eyes and shouted sternly outside the hall, "Who is it? How dare you come my Dragon Head Peak and behave so atrociously?" Before he finished speaking, the old man raised his hand and waved his sleeve. A golden light flew out and directly shot towards Chunshi at the other end of the plaza. This move came too suddenly. Chunshi didn't even have time to react, and the golden light had already arrived in front of him. Seeing this, Chunshi's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Feeling the powerful, true essence contained in it, Chunshi hurriedly withdrew the aura concealment secret technique, and then, like the old man, he waved his sleeve and released a burst of true essence. Then, a white light suddenly shot out from Chunshi's palm and collided with the golden light. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 417. The Imperial Hall was the core area of Tiandu, so the celestial venerables of the 10 directions naturally had the most complete control over this place. Although Chunshi had the aura concealment secret technique to protect his body, the moment he saw the sky-bearing technique, he couldn't help but feel a ripple in his heart. That was why a celestial venerable sitting cross-legged in the main hall sensed something strange. And this celestial venerable, who keenly sensed that someone had trespassed on Dragon Head Peak, was someone she had long heard of, Yuan Tianzuan. Although they had never met before, Yuan Tianzuan's reputation had long been branded in Chunshi's heart. After all, apart from being Wushu's biological father, Yuan Tianzuan was also the leader of the 10 celestial venerables. If Tiandu was compared to a large multinational company, then Yuan Tianzuan was obviously the executive chairman of the company. One could imagine how powerful he was. Therefore, When Yuan Tianzuan casually released a burst of true essence, everyone was alarmed. That golden light came too suddenly. After shooting out of the main hall, it was like a laser that pierced through the entire square. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but look sideways. Just as everyone was feeling strange, a figure appeared out of thin air in front of the originally empty mountain gate. Immediately after, that person casually released a ray of white light under the gazes of everyone, colliding with the golden light that shot out from the main hall. Bang! Suddenly, a huge explosion sounded. After all, it was a battle between celestial venerables, so the few Star Lords closest to the center of the explosion were sent flying by the dispersing force. This scene was very similar to the school field at noon. Thousands of teachers and students were excitedly doing broadcast gymnastics. Suddenly, the flag-raising platform exploded for no reason. It was easy to imagine how shocked and astonished everyone present was. In the tens of thousands of years of history of Tiandu, it wasn't that no one had caused trouble on Dragon Head Peak Square, but to dare to cause trouble when all the celestial venerables were gathered on Dragon Head Peak. She was the first. As the explosion gradually subsided, Chun-Chi's figure was clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. At the sight of this audacious intruder, some nearby Immortal generals uttered long roars at once as they rushed towards Chun-Chi at the same time. "How dare you? Everyone, follow me and take him down. I'd like to see which bastard dares to behave atrociously on Dragon Head Peak." What kind of joke was this? The 5 divine generals were in charge of guarding one area. Right now, all the divine generals were gathered at Dragon Head Peak, but someone still secretly touched their faces. If this wasn't collective dereliction of duty, then what was? Therefore, even without the orders of the celestial venerables, a divine general was dispatched from each direction to charge at Chun-Chi. Today, they had to take down this audacious intruder at the first possible moment and give the Empyreans an explanation. Everyone tacitly agreed that the intruder was doomed. But right at that moment, however, a shocking scene suddenly occurred. The 5 divine generals charged at the intruder from different directions at an extremely fast speed. However, the intruder didn't turn around and run away immediately. Instead, he frowned and clenched his right hand into a fist. Instantly, a long sword condensed from true essence appeared in his hand. Seeing this, the 5 divine generals were instantly enraged like provoked ferocious beasts. They couldn't help but want to tear this audacious intruder into pieces on the spot. Therefore, the 5 divine generals each took out their own trump cards. Regardless of whether this fellow could withstand it, the 5 divine generals roared angrily and launched an attack together. In an instant, brilliant light shot in all directions and the void shook. Surging true essence wreaked havoc in the air above the square. All kinds of Dharma treasures carried the endless anger of their owners and heavily smashed towards the intruder's location. At this moment, the long sword in Chun-Chi's hand also began to dance. The Dharma idol's long sword shone with a green light and shone brightly in his hand. Even compared to the colorful Dharma treasures in the hands of the divine generals, the Dharma idols of the divine generals did not lose out in terms of appearance. Chun-Chi's original plan was to sneak in and observe. He didn't want to alert the enemy. But now that the infiltration failed, he could only come up with Plan B. Plan B was actually very simple. That was becoming famous in one battle, establishing dominance through battle, showing his strength at the peak of the soul formation stage to win respect, and then talk to the 10 celestial lords as equals. Since he wanted to establish dominance, he had to show 120% of his ability in the first move. Although the Moonlight Sword technique was exquisite, it was not shocking enough. So after Chun-Chi thought about it for a while, just now he took out the killing weapon that he had always been unwilling to use in actual combat, the Xuanpu sword technique. The Grain God did not die because of the Xuanpu reed, pin betrothal. The Xuanpu gate was the root of heaven and earth. It was continuous and did not need to be used diligently. This move was called Xuanpu. With the creation of yin and yang as the root, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams as the form, there were 8 moves. Qian was as strong as the sky, and Dui said it was like rain. Li was as beautiful as the sun, and shook like thunder. Sun entered like the wind, and can sank like the water. Jin stopped like the mountain, and Kuan was like the earth. The 8 moves swayed 64 times, and the combination changed. The exquisite parts were endless, and the intricate parts were intertwined. Chun-Shi was now using the first move, sword-raising technique. Sword-raising 6 dragons to heaven, grand universe. This sword technique was also the most precious treasure of the heavenly evolution divine sect, but very few people used it. The reason was not that it was not good. Instead, it was because it was too good that very few people used it. After all, things like cultivation techniques, just like feelings, what was suitable for oneself was the best. The Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for Chun-Shi. On one hand, it was because Chun-Shi's cultivation was not enough. On the other hand, it was because this sword technique was very large and required one to use all their strength. This also meant that the Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for ordinary battles. It was only suitable for a desperate fight at the end of the road. Therefore, the moment Chun-Shi drew his sword, the entire sky seemed to darken. 6 golden sword lights surrounded Chun-Shi. The sword hilts were below, and the sword tips were pointing to the sky. Like 6 hungry leeches, they crazily sucked out a huge amount of true yuan from Chun-Shi's body, causing Chun-Shi's aura to become much weaker in an instant. If it wasn't for the fact that he was forcing himself to look calm and composed, everyone present would have mistakenly thought that he was afraid. The 5 divine generals' Dharma treasures arrived with a loud bang. Chun-Shi's sword lights also shot out in all directions. There were only 5 enemies, but there were 6 sword lights. Even if each person had 1 sword, there would still be 1 sword left. Therefore, Chun-Shi shot the 6th sword at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was sitting in the Imperial Hall. It was impolite to not return the favor. The moment the Xuanpu sword technique appeared, who could compete with it? The vast and continuous sword lights were as strong and hot as the sun. The moment the Dharma treasures of the 5 divine generals came into contact with the sword lights, they immediately trembled and let out a series of wong 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 sorrowful cries. Then, under the shocked expressions of the 5 divine generals, the 5 sword lights showed an unstoppable force, and, at the same time, sent the 5 grade 9 spiritual treasures flying. Then, they continued to shoot towards their location. Chapter 4:18. Raising Sword Style. Sword raises 6 dragons to conquer the heavens. Great Qian Yuan. Since this place was called Dragon Head Peak, Chun-Shi was going to trample the dragon head under his feet today. Sword Qi spread for 30,000 miles. Purple Qi and green robe flowing east. On Dragon Head Peak, Ultimate Emperor Palace. Everyone, please follow me. Riding a horse with a sword, singing to the ends of the earth. After the sword radiance shot out, the 5 divine generals cried out in pain in unison. Then, the 5 of them flew back in the direction they came from at an even faster speed. In an instant, everyone was shocked. But what was even more surprising was that, just as the 5 divine generals were pushed back, a golden sword light brazenly pierced through the square and shot toward the Imperial Hall, where the celestial venerables were with an earth-shattering momentum. At this moment, Yuhuan Tianduan, who had been sitting cross-legged in the palace with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes with a trace of surprise on his face. The sword radiance seemed to have split the void, so much so that when the sword approached the ultimate Emperor Palace, the bottom of the palace began to tremble slightly, as if there was an earthquake. A battle between experts happened in the blink of an eye. Yuhuan Tianzuan frowned, and a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. He seemed to be blaming the 5 divine generals for their negligence. So when he saw that the sword radiance was about to shoot into the ultimate Emperor Palace, he immediately raised his hand and summoned the magic treasure that made him famous, the Jade World Glazed Cup. This lamp was in the shape of a tower, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. There was an inextinguishable golden flame in it, known as the Myriad Spirits Ancient E. This magic treasure constantly revolved around heavenly venerate Yuhuan, so its name could be said to be known by everyone in the great world. However, although this magic treasure was famous, not many people had seen its true power. After all, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, so how could he casually fight with others? Therefore, when Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan took out the Jade World Glazed Cup, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell, and Heavenly Venerate Xuanjin couldn't help but be surprised. When they looked at the sword light again, even their eyes couldn't help but change. In their perception, although this sword light was coming menacingly, the sword force was not released, so the 2 celestial venerables were unable to accurately judge its power. Then, under the gazes of the 3 celestial venerables, the Jade World Glazed Cup flew out of the Emperor Extreme Palace and collided with the sword beam. Bang! An invisible force swept across the square, and waves of air that were as sharp as steel blades spread out in all directions. The energy hit the restrictions of the Imperial Extreme Palace and instantly shot out 10,000 rays of divine light. At that moment, the dragon head sang loudly, and multicolored light filled the sky. The 5 divine generals retreated one after another. The Rakshasa Star Sovereign was at a loss. This scene was very much like a forest where gunshots rang out. Frightened birds fluttered about and flew away. The originally orderly square had become noisy because of this. It was as noisy as a market. How dare you? Yuhuan Tianzuan was furious. After a stern shout, he leaped out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. The berserk true essence that had been triggered by the exchange of blows between the 2 of them had also completely disappeared. It was as if nothing had happened. Everyone kept quiet out of fear and returned to their original positions, not daring to make any more noise. There is no such person as you in the world. Who exactly are you? Yuhuan Tianzuan hovered above the square, lowered his head, and sized up Chun Shi before asking in a deep voice. Hearing this, the corners of Chun Shi's mouth curled up slightly. Then he mimicked Yuhuan Tianzuan and slowly flew up from the ground. Only when he was at the same height as Yuhuan Tianzuan did Chun Shi reply with a calm expression, "This humble one is Chun Shi from the lower realms." As soon as these words came out, everyone, including Yuhuan Tianzuan, was shocked. Tiandu was extremely particular about rules. As long as a celestial master was present, no one was allowed to make the slightest noise. It was precisely because of this that no matter how shocked the divine generals were, they were like wooden men standing in the square in a daze, silent and looking straight ahead. Lower realms? How is that possible? Yuhuan Tianzuan muttered to himself. Then he suddenly opened his right hand and called the Jade Huan Glaze Cup over again. In the probing exchange, just now, Yuhuan Tianzuan was actually at a disadvantage. Of course, it could also be said that Yuhuan Tianzuan did not use his true strength, so Chun Shi was lucky enough to take advantage of it. But one had to know that this advantage was not something that anyone could take advantage of. So, this stranger who claimed to be from the lower realms was actually at the Celestial Master level? How is that possible? The first thought that flashed through Yuhuan Tianzuan's mind was that it was impossible. But then Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and his expression suddenly turned cold. He stared at Chun Shi and asked in a deep voice, "You're from the lower realms? Could it be you're the one who destroyed the 5 directional sacred palace?" After hearing this, Chun Shi's face suddenly stiffened, and he replied somewhat embarrassedly, "It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding." At this time, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanjin also flew out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell heard the conversation between the 2, so before Yuhuan Tianzuan could continue asking, he could not help but ask, "In that case, Changli died at your hands?" Changli was a divine general. After all, how could he have died silently in the lower realms? Since this person in front of him had the strength of a heavenly venerable, and at the same time said that he was from the lower realms, in that case, everything made sense. Faced with Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell's criticism, Chun Shi suddenly did not know how to answer, and his hesitation It also indirectly confirmed the guesses of the three heavenly venerables. Therefore, the scene that could barely be considered harmonious suddenly became like a gas station on fire. It exploded in an instant. Yuhuan Tianzuan's pupil shrank, and then he muttered in a very strange tone. So it's you destroying the foundation of the divine ancestor, cutting off the path of my heavenly capital, Changli, Qingluan, Baihong, Shuixiang, and my son Wushu. The moment he mentioned the two words Wushu, Yuhuan Tianzuan clearly paused for a moment. Then, an uncontrollable anger flashed in his eyes. In a moment of agitation, Yuhuan Tianzuan no longer had the sage-like aura of the past. He was like an enraged lion. He bared his teeth, and his beard and hair stood on end. You committed all kinds of monstrous crimes in the lower realms, and today you actually dare to come to my Dragon Head Peak to cause trouble? Do you really think that there's no one in my heavenly capital? Hateful, hateful. Since you're bent on courting death, this old man will make an exception today and send you on your way. You little thief, hand over your life. Before he finished speaking, the Jade World Glaze Cup in Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand was like a meteor drawing a streak of light in the air and then ruthlessly smashed towards Chunxi. Chapter 419. If emotions could be expressed in reality, then Chunxi would definitely send countless black question marks to Yuhuan Tianzuan. What was going on? Why was the development of things completely different from what he had imagined? Chunxi originally thought that as long as he displayed the strength of a heavenly venerable, Tiandu would give him a high standard of reception. Who would have thought, after he displayed his strength, before he could even say a few words, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly flipped the table and turned hostile. In a rage, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly smashed the Jade Huan Glaze Cup heavily at Chunxi. And at this time, this treasure that was famous in Tiandu, just now it fully displayed its true power to the world. Glazed Hellfire, a sky lantern, burning to the 8 wastelands, 10,000 spirits enchanting. The moment the Jade Huan Glaze Cup flew out, this magic treasure was like a Kongming lantern that had been ignited, floating toward Chunxi with raging flames. As the Glaze Cup got closer and closer to Chunxi's position, the fire was so big that it could be said to be burning the prairie and the sky. Because Dragon Head Peak was protected by the array, the fire did not rush out of the array, but raged and burned crazily inside the array. As a result, many Star Lords with lower cultivation were scared out of their wits on the spot, and could only shrink in the corner of the square and tremble. But what made people feel strange was the raging flames filled the sky and swept through the square at the same time. The raging flames attached to everyone, but they could not feel the slightest bit of heat from it, as if the monstrous flames were just an illusion. Seeing this, everyone immediately felt a lot more at ease, so they all turned to look at the unlucky intruder. Where did this guy come from? He could actually make Yuhuan Tianzuan disregard his status and angrily teach him a lesson. Unlike the previous probing exchange, Yuhuan Tianzuan attacked with all his strength this time. So the moment Chunxi saw the glazed cup smashing toward him, his brows immediately furrowed tightly. To be honest, Chunxi didn't expect Yuhuan Tianzuan to be so aggressive. Although he had indeed caused a lot of trouble for Heaven Capital when he was on Earth, it was all out of self-defense. So Chunxi had always felt that, as long as he could have a good talk with Tiandu, there would still be room for mediation. However, Chunxi's idea was good. However, the other party didn't listen to him and came at him aggressively. They didn't even give him a chance to explain. What happened? You become a victim? The life and death of the love of my life is uncertain. My beloved daughter is still young and has no one to rely on. I went through a lot of hardships to return to Earth, but I didn't expect that after a few days of happiness, I would end up being separated from my family. How could Chunxi accept this? All of this was because of these damned ancient cultivators. Thinking of this, even though Chunxi had experienced 200 years of mental toughening in the dark space, at this moment, a monstrous hatred rose in his heart. So, the moment he saw the jade glazed cup flying over, Chun-Shi immediately waved the godly sword Dharma power in his hand and pointed the sword at Yuhuan Tianzuan. At the same time, he shouted sternly, I didn't want to be enemies with Heaven Capital, but you just had to be so aggressive. Heaven Capital, Heavenly Master, using your name to shout so loudly. Am I really afraid of you? At the same time, the godly sword Dharma power in Chun-Shi's hand also danced. The long sword swept across the sky, stirring up a breeze like a ribbon, strand after strand, winding around Chun-Shi's body. The breeze blew the ends of his hair and also ruffled his clothes. There was no earth-shattering scene, but Chun-Shi's momentum suddenly rose along with the breeze. At the moment when the jade glaze cup was about to hit him, Chun-Shi waved the long sword in his hand. If the sky was divided into two halves, then one side would be a raging flame, and the other side would be a formless breeze. Mysterious sword formula. Changing sword style. Windy sky. A gentleman should be virtuous. When the flame met the breeze, the sun was just right, and the breeze was not dry. If the great Qian Yuan was a strong heavy sword, then windy sky was a soft and long soft sword. The jade glaze cup was like a fireball, fiercely smashing toward Chun-Shi. However, just as the fireball was about to hit Chun-Shi, an invisible net of sword chi blocked it. Just like the moment when a football was shot into the goal frame, the fireball rolled in the net of sword chi for a while before finally helplessly turning into a wisp of black smoke and completely dissipating in the air. Then, the net of sword chi also disappeared into nothingness. This move did not determine the winner or loser. It could be said that they were evenly matched, but it was also because of this heavenly venerable wondrous spell, heavenly venerable Xuanjin, and countless divine generals and Star-Lord watching the battle in the square. Everyone was shocked by the strength Chun-Shi displayed at this moment. There was actually someone in this world who could fight Yuhuan Tianzuan to a draw. What kind of joke was this? Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to be a little surprised by Chun-Shi's strength. Seeing that his attack had no effect, he suddenly let out a long laugh. Interesting, I haven't fought with anyone for hundreds of years, Mr. Chun, right? Today, this old man will remember your name first. Until the next day, I'll definitely not forget to place a memorial tablet for you in the Imperial Hall. As soon as he finished speaking, Yuhuan Tianzuan's figure flashed, and he charged toward Chun-Shi. It seemed that this heavenly venerable, who was usually high and mighty, was really going to fight to his heart's content with Chun-Shi today. Seeing this, Chun-Shi did not cower in the slightest. So what if you're a heavenly venerable? I'll send you to heaven today. Take another strike from my sword. The Jade World Glaze Cup's flames surged, and the Divine General's Dharma Idol's sword momentum was endless. The two heavenly venerable cultivators collided fiercely in midair, just like that. In an instant, the dissipating true essence was like ice blades and frost, shooting in all directions without distinguishing between friend and foe. Many divine generals could not dodge in time and were immediately injured by the chi energy, causing countless small scratches to appear on their bodies. These scratches seemed weak and harmless, but in fact, they carried the true essence imprints of Chun-Shi and Yuhuan Tianzuan. Therefore, the moment the chi energy entered their bodies, these injured divine generals cried out in pain and hurriedly dodged to the side, trying to circulate their energy to force the destructive chi energy out of their bodies. Seeing that the battle had affected many people, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanjin exchanged a look and immediately flew back to Imperial Zenith Hall. They took the initiative to close the protective array of Dragon Head Peak so that Chun-Shi and Yuhuan Tianzuan could fight more freely. As long as Yuhuan Tianzuan did not take the initiative to ask for help in this battle, no one could interfere. Although Heaven Capital was strong, it disdained to fight with many people, so it gave Chun-Shi such a relatively fair battlefield. This was a battle between heavenly venerables. It was also a battle between two heavenly venerables for their respective dignity. Although Chun-Shi did not come from the great world, he had successfully proved himself with his strength. He was not weaker than a heavenly venerable. Whether I'm wrong or not, I actually have some idea in my heart. You may not have noticed the title of each volume. This is the fourth volume, and the title of this volume is, coincidentally, This Student is Young and in His Prime. Hey, the climax scenes in the past were too short, so can you let me write a longer one this time? Maybe I didn't write well enough, so I felt very bored. Please forgive me, everyone. Be more tolerant of this newbie, so that the next book will be better. 3. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heaven's Divine Emperor Mobile Edition website. Chapter 420. Titles like Yuan, Tianzuan, and Divine Lord of Dawn were just nicknames. Since the strength of the 5 divine generals was equivalent to the Yuanying stage, then the 10 heavenly lords were equivalent to the soul formation stage. The difference between the soul formation stage and the Yuanying stage seemed to be only one stage. But this difference could be said to be the difference between heaven and earth, the difference between clouds and mud. Using the orthodox cultivation heritage of the heavenly jade world as an example, after a cultivator had refined and accumulated their true yuan to a certain extent, they could refine this true yuan to a perfect state and form a golden core. After forming a golden core, the golden core became the foundation of a cultivator's cultivation, and at the same time, it was a hotbed for yuanying. It was like a seed that was scattered in the soil. As long as it was carefully cared for, it would eventually blossom and bear fruit. The flower that blossomed from the golden core, this was the so-called yuanying. Yuanying was formed from the transformation of the golden core. During the entire transformation process, the cultivator's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls would gradually transfer from the heart to the yuanying. As long as the yuanying was not extinguished, the soul would not dissipate. It was also because of this that even if a cultivator's physical body was destroyed during the yuanying stage, they could still use the yuanying to possess another body and obtain a new life. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, void. If the Qi refinement stage was the starting point for one to enter the immortal sect, then the foundation establishment and golden core stages were actually just a process of continuous consolidation. Cultivation was also mainly about refining the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and refining one's own true yuan. In fact, even though the golden core stage was called a heavenly man, they had not truly entered the next level of qualitative change. Only after a cultivator had formed yuanying and merged their soul with the yuanying would they truly begin to undergo a second qualitative change. Therefore, the entire process from Qi refinement to golden core was also called transforming essence into Qi. There are no shortcuts on the path of cultivation. It could be said that one had to take one step at a time. This aspect had not been mentioned before because those below the semi-god realm were nothing but ants. Divine generals seemed high and mighty, but in Chunxi's eyes, there wasn't much difference between divine generals and celestials. After all, transforming energy into Qi was only the first stage. Only when a cultivator broke through to the yuanying stage and began to explore the threshold of the soul formation stage would they officially step into the second stage, which was refining Qi into spirit. Everything was easy to learn, but difficult to master. Cultivation was no exception. It took Chunxi 500 years to progress from the Qi refinement stage to the soul formation stage. Compared to those old freaks who spent thousands of years to reach the soul formation stage, this cultivation speed was already very terrifying. But even with Chunxi's outstanding talent for cultivation, after reaching the divine transformation stage, it would be extremely difficult to make further breakthroughs. Because at this level, refining essence into Qi was no longer the main point. Refining Qi into spirit was the main point. The so-called divinity transformation was to fuse yuanying with the divine soul, allowing it to undergo a qualitative change and form primordial spirit. Golden core, yuanying, primordial spirit. This was a transformation that every cultivator had to go through. Chunxi's cultivation had already reached the peak of the soul formation stage, only one step away from the insightful emptiness stage. So what he really had to face now was understanding the true meaning of the word void, understanding the first law of heaven and earth, and undergoing another qualitative change. This was something at the next level. Chun-Shi had yet to understand it, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was naturally far from it. Let's talk about the Dragon Head Peak first. After Yuhuan Tianzuan charged at Chun-Shi, the two immediately engaged in an all-out battle. The intensity of a battle at this level was completely beyond everyone's imagination. There was no concept of planets in the great world. After leaving the floating island, there was only the endless void left. Therefore, after Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spells closed the protective array, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately lured Chun-Shi into the depths of the void to prevent the battle from reaching the Imperial Zenith Hall. Without the restriction of the venue, the battle instantly became more intense. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spells and Heavenly Lord Xuanjin led a group of divine generals and celestial lords to watch the battle from afar. This battle shocked the entire great world. Almost everyone was watching this battle between heavenly venerables. The glazed glass lamp was blazing with red flames, and the divine general's Dharma idol sword shadows were endless. Astral winds blew, and divine light fluttered. The void trembled, and everyone looked down. If the floating island's protective array formation had not been personally set up by the grand pure divine ancestor, it would have been destroyed by the shock waves from their battle. And as Yuhuan Tianzuan gradually revealed his full strength, Chun-Shi also fell into a disadvantage. This was the first time Chun-Shi was so passive in a battle since returning to Earth. On one hand, it was because he had not recovered to his peak state. On the other hand, it was entirely because of the jade glazed glass lamp in Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand. In any case, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the 10 heavenly venerables. At the same time, he also had the help of a supreme treasure like the jade glazed glass lamp. Chun-Shi was alone and did not even have a weapon to back him up. Thus, he did not dare to face him head-on. Thus, Chun-Shi could only retreat as he fought. He tried to find Yuhuan Tianzuan's weakness in the battle and defeat him in one fell swoop. After a fierce battle, Chun-Shi had a rough idea of Yuhuan Tianzuan's strength. Although this old man's cultivation was high, it was obvious that he was slightly inferior. He was about the mid-stage soul formation. It was unknown whether it was because the great world was too peaceful, but Yuhuan Tianzuan's combat experience was clearly inferior to Chun-Shi's because he had not experienced blood and fire. Thus, Chun-Shi decided to show weakness to his enemy and silently look for an opportunity. If he was strong, he would be strong. If he was tyrannical, he would be tyrannical. When Yuhuan Tianzuan saw that Chun-Shi kept retreating, he mistakenly thought that Chun-Shi was afraid of fighting. Thus, he did not think much and immediately stepped up his attack, trying to create pressure for Chun-Shi. But what Yuhuan Tianzuan did not expect was, just as he threw out the glazed glass lamp again, Chun-Shi's eyes suddenly lit up. Found it! All the threats came from the jade glazed glass lamp. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had kept the glazed glass lamp by his side and personally went forward to fight with Chun-Shi, Chun-Shi might have some scruples. But now, Yuhuan Tianzuan threw out the glazed glass lamp, trying to kill him with a supreme treasure. Such a reckless approach was exactly what Chun-Shi wanted to see happen. Thus, Chun-Shi immediately held his breath and focused, turning a blind eye to the glazed glass lamp in front of him. Instead, he placed all his attention on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Just as the jade glazed glass lamp was about to hit, Chun-Shi drew his sword. Changing sword style, into softness. Even movement is hard. One had to know that the profound valley sword art was not a cultivation technique that Chun-Shi created himself. It was the culmination of a senior expert's lifetime of hard work. And then through the continuous refinement of the sect masters of the Heavenly Evolution Divine Sect, it was a classic that had been handed down for generations. The profound valley sword art was exquisite beyond compare. The sword started from Taiji and divided into yin and yang. The 4 trigrams of yang were Qian Dui Li Zhan. The 4 trigrams of yin were Sun Qinjin Koan. The 3 trigrams of yang went against the sword, and the 3 trigrams of yin went with the sword. When released, it covered heaven and earth, and hid yin and yang unfathomable. The 6 trigrams of qi shook heaven and earth, and the 4 trigrams of qi went against the flow. The 4 trigrams of the sun and moon and the stars changed when moved. She had pretended to be weak in order to use this killer move. Thus, the moment he drew his sword, the surging true essence immediately affected the qi, and an intense killing intent instantly filled the endless void where the two of them were. Yuhuan Tianzuan sensed that something was wrong and hurriedly wanted to withdraw the glazed glass lamp. But at this moment, Shi had already swung the sword in his hand. Please remember the domain name of this book.com. Wonderful book mobile version website.com. Chapter 421. Kuan was the softest, and when it moved, it was the strongest. The moment this sword was swung out, an aurora appeared in the sky of the great world for the first time. Looking at it from afar, it was so beautiful and dazzling, full of colors. Against the endless void, the sword shadows that filled the sky were like colorful ribbons. Ying gently floated toward Yuhuan Tianzuan along with the breeze. Then, the sword shadows collided with the burning jade world glazed cup. But what was surprising was that the sword shadows were like ripples of water. The moment they touched the jade world glazed cup, they immediately split and floated to the sides, as if they were actively making way for the cup. The jade world glazed cup smashed toward she like a hot knife through butter. Meanwhile, the sword shadows circled around the lamp and gracefully drifted toward heavenly venerable Yuhuan. And this was the opportunity that she had been waiting for a long time. At the cost of taking a hit from the glazed cup in exchange for a chance to hit Yuhuan Tianzuan with a sword. A sword for a cup. It seemed like there was no difference, but in fact, she had profited. As the saying went, those who were barefoot were not afraid of those who were wearing shoes. He was an old bachelor. If it was purely a competition of Dharma treasures, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Therefore, the strategy of harming the enemy while harming himself was clearly the best strategy. Therefore, by the time Yuhuan Tianzuan realized something was wrong, it was already too late for him to take back the glazed cup. As a result, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only watch as the sword shadows, which were like huge waves on the sea, came crashing toward him. Boom! With a loud boom, a magnificent scene similar to that of a planet exploding appeared before everyone's eyes. Along with the blazing light produced by the explosion, billions of needle-like rays of light shot into everyone's eyes. These rays of light still contained the true essence of the two celestial venerables, so when they entered their eyes, it gave people a heart-wrenching pain. Among them, those with lower cultivation levels were pierced by the qi on the spot, causing blood to seep out of their eye sockets. Except for the two Empyreans, Miao Fa and Xianzhen, almost everyone was affected by the aftermath of the battle. The surging true yuan wreaked havoc in the boundless void, causing the 120,000 floating islands to tremble. The heavens of the great world was going to collapse. Fortunately, every floating island had a protective formation left behind by the divine ancestor. So no matter how intense the battle was, it had very little effect on the residents of the islands. When the strong light began to weaken, everyone turned their heads, wanting to know the result of this battle as soon as possible. As everyone looked over, they could see that heavenly venerable Yuhuan was still facing off against the unknown invader in the distant void. It was as if nothing had happened. It was as if the victor had not been decided yet. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but sigh. This was indeed a battle between heavenly venerables. From the looks of it, it would be impossible to determine the victor in a short period of time. However, just as everyone was looking forward to a more exciting battle scene, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood essence. Then, he pointed at Chunxi in horror and sighed. "Where did you come from? It's impossible for an expert like you to appear in the lower realm. Impossible." After this battle, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw Chun-Shi's true ability. If he didn't have a defensive magic treasure on him, this sword might have left a mark on his body. Even so, this sword still hurt Yuhuan Tianzuan so much so that his breathing was obviously a little irregular and the blood in his chest was constantly surging. Can we sit down and talk now? Chun-Shi didn't directly answer Yuhuan Tianzuan's question. After he withdrew the divine, general celestial body in his hand, he made an inviting gesture to Yuhuan Tianzuan, giving Yuhuan Tianzuan enough face. After all, unless it was absolutely necessary, Chun-Shi really didn't want to use force to solve the problem. However, what Chun-Shi didn't expect was that, after hearing his words, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. Then, he suddenly sent a voice transmission to the two heavenly venerables, Miaofa and Xuanjun. This thief is tricky. Please lend me a hand and take him down. Hearing this, heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanjun couldn't help but look at each other. They seemed to have some concerns in their hearts. It was not that they didn't want to help, but because of their status, they felt that it was a little difficult. After all, the three of them were the high and mighty heavenly venerables of the 10 directions. Now, they actually wanted to join forces to attack one person. What would the onlookers think? As heavenly venerables, did they have any shame? Seeing that the two of them were hesitating, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately added, "This person's origin is unknown. You have seen the moves that he used just now. His cultivation method seems to be more exquisite than the great clear orthodoxy left behind by the divine ancestor. Therefore, I suspect that he didn't come from the lower realm at all, but from somewhere else. This person has a big secret on him. If he can fall into our hands, it will be a great thing. I ask the two of you to help me capture him. Don't let him escape." At this point, if heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanjun still didn't express their opinions, they wouldn't be giving Yuhuan Tianzuan any face. Moreover, after watching the battle just now, the two of them had developed a great interest in the Dark Valley Sword technique that Chun-Shi used. Therefore, after looking at each other, they directly rushed toward Chun-Shi. Anyway, the 10 Directions heavens had already lost all their face. What was the point of saying so much nonsense? As long as they captured this person, they could find a random reason to explain it to the onlookers. From the beginning to the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't want to negotiate with Chun-Shi. On one hand, it was because of Wushu's death. On the other hand, it was completely because an ordinary man was innocent, but treasuring a jade ring was a crime. Chun-Shi contended empty-handed against Empyrean Yuhuan, who wielded a supreme treasure. Even so, he still held the upper hand. Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't need to think with his but to know Chun-Shi's cultivation method was definitely stronger than the Great Clear Orthodoxy. How could he not be tempted? Everyone wanted to improve, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was no exception. Therefore, a scene that made everyone's jaws drop happened. 3 heavenly venerables actually attacked that unknown intruder at the same time. Was this a group attack because they couldn't win in a one-on-one fight? Chun-Shi's condition wasn't very good to begin with. In the battle just now, although he was lucky enough to win against Yuhuan Tianzuan, he had also used up most of his energy. Now that he saw the 3 heavenly venerables charging at him at the same time, Chun-Shi's first thought was to run. However, as soon as this thought appeared, it was immediately thrown out of his mind. He couldn't run. Ying was still waiting for him to save her. The soul mirror was in the square outside the Imperial Hall. So, even if he died today, he had to smash that broken mirror first. All right, the updates were not good enough. Even breathing was wrong. Big bosses, I was wrong. You read a lot, so of course you know the traditional cultivation realms, but some readers don't know. As a salted fish, I really don't dare to promise how much I will update every day. I also don't want to lie to you and paint a big picture for you. In short, under the situation of maintaining daily updates, I'll update as much as I can. Look, I updated early today, so I could save 300 more words there at night. Chapter 422. Deep in a Void. The 3 heavenly lords no longer cared about their identities and attacked Chun-Shi with all their might. What was originally a one-on-one duel had now become a 3-on-1 brawl. It had been a long time since such a grand event had happened in the great world. Everyone hid on their own floating islands and watched as the four heavenly venerables engaged in a chaotic battle. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's cultivation were slightly lower than Yuhuan Tianzuan's. They were about the early stage of the soul formation realm. Using the soul formation realm as an example, each realm could be roughly divided into the early stage, the middle stage, the late stage, and the peak stage, which was only half a step away from the next realm. Although she had already stepped into the peak of the soul formation realm, he had never recovered to his peak state. Moreover, he did not have any magic treasures on him. Therefore, when he was surrounded by 2 early-stage soul formation and 1 mid-stage soul formation, he suddenly felt a little powerless. He could barely deal with the attacks of the 3 of them, let alone counterattack. Although Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's cultivation were slightly lower, their magic treasures were also extraordinary. The Jade Huan glazed lamp was already powerful enough. However, if Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's 8-view palace lantern and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's coffin lamp were added, these 3 magic treasures that looked like lanterns combined to form a top-notch treasure that could shake the entire heaven capital. The 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Among them, the Jade Huan glazed lamp was heaven, the 8-view palace lantern was earth, and the coffin lamp was man. Similar to the Jade Huan glazed lamp, there was a flame in the 8-view palace lantern called the sky-burning purple flame. There is also a flame in the coffin lamp called the netherworld ghost flame. If the Jade Huan glazed lamp's myriad spirit ancient was added, then the 3 most powerful flames in the world were all here. She did not recognize these 3 magic treasures, so naturally, he had never heard of the names of these 3 flames. However, his intuition told him that these 3 flames must not be touched. Once touched, the 3 flames would be like maggots in his bones. With his true essence as fuel, they would burn him to ashes. The 3 of them held the flames in their hands and pressed on. Shi defended himself with his sword and retreated as he fought. Every time the 2 sides clashed, it was like fireworks on New Year's Eve, constantly blooming colorful lights in the void. Every time they clashed, the energy waves produced by their true yuan would constantly crash into the defensive formation of the 120,000 floating islands. For a moment, divine light filled the sky, shaking the void. What a magnificent scene! However, it was also in this seemingly gorgeous scene that a murderous aura was lurking. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause Shi to meet a tragic end. Shi had no chance of winning. However, he did not run away. Instead, he used all of his strength to fight against the 3 celestial venerables at the same time. He didn't want to defeat the 3 of them. Instead, he wanted to use the floating dawn mirror. Since it was for Ying, it was also for Nyin. Thus, without the 3 celestial venerables noticing, Shi gradually pulled the battlefield to the vicinity of Dragon Head Peak. They were so close that the onlookers on the island could even clearly see the different expressions on their faces. The battle lasted for a long time. Shi also persisted for a long time. When the 3 celestial venerables once again released the heaven, earth, and man lanterns at the same time, Shi's true essence was obviously insufficient. This caused his sword to be slower by a beat, allowing the 3 heaven, earth, and man lanterns to successfully reach him. In an instant, true essence surged, and flames burst forth. The 3 heaven, earth, and man lanterns hit Shi's chest at the same time, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Then, like a meteor falling to earth, his entire body was on fire as he fiercely smashed into the square of Dragon Head Peak from the sky. Seeing this, the heavenly generals and star venerables on the square instantly scattered like frightened beasts. What kind of joke was this? These were the 3 legendary heaven-burning divine fires. Just a little bit of it would probably cripple one's entire life. Thus, after Shi's entire body was on fire and he heavily smashed into the ground like a meteor, he was the only one left in this huge square in an instant. If not for the protection of the array on the ground, he would probably have smashed a meteor crater on the spot. This person has a shocking cultivation, but unfortunately, he fell here today. Although he's our enemy, this old man can't help but feel pity for him. What a pity, what a pity! After retrieving the 8 scenic palace lanterns, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell turned to look at the flames below. Seeing Chun-Shi's aura gradually weakening, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell couldn't help but sigh. Today, this person fought 1 against 3. Even if he unfortunately fell, it could be considered a glorious death. Whether friend or foe, just based on the strength alone, this person was enough to win the respect he deserved. While Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell felt sorry for Chun-Shi, Yuan Tianzuan didn't seem to feel the same way. Because he had fought Chun-Shi the most, Yuan Tianzuan didn't relax in the slightest, even after Chun-Shi had been hit by the 3 lanterns. Instead, he felt that this matter was rather strange. It wasn't that he was very clear about Chun-Shi's strength. It was just a simple intuition. If it weren't for his pride, Yuan Tianzuan probably wouldn't have been able to resist the urge to deliver a few more blows. The 3 heavenly venerates flew in the air, each pondering something as they looked at the flames. However, at this moment, Chun-Shi made his move. Originally on the verge of death, he suddenly erupted with an earth-shattering aura and crawled up from the ground. Before the 3 heavenly venerates could react, Chun-Shi charged directly toward the soul mirror floating in the middle of square. Oh no, we've been tricked. His target is the soul mirror. It was only now that Yuan Tianzuan truly understood Chun-Shi's objective, and he hurriedly hurled the jade glaze cup in his hand. Yuan Tianzuan's reaction was quick enough. However, he was still a beat slower than Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell. As soon as Chun-Shi stood up, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell transmitted his voice to everyone in the square. Everyone, heed my command. Protect the soul mirror. Do not let this person near the soul mirror, even if you have to perish. Many of the divine generals were already standing not far away from the soul mirror, so they immediately rushed toward it upon hearing Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's command and charged toward Chun-Shi with all their might. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Chun-Shi ignored the raging flames on his body and pounced toward the soul mirror. Dozens of divine generals tried to stop him, but Chun-Shi roared with bloodshot eyes like a crazed beast. Get out of my way! Before he could finish his sentence, the true origin energy that was filled with blood and chi was like a huge fan. In an instant, the tens of original infant stage cultivators were sent flying. Back then, Zhao Zilong had entered and exited Changban 7 times. Today, Chun-Shi was going to enter and exit Dragonhead Peak 7 times as well. This was the so-called, where the sword points, the heart points. The road ahead is perilous. Even if there are millions of enemies, I will still press on. Please remember the domain name of this book.com, the mobile version of wondrousbook.com. Chapter 423. Chun-Shi had been secretly observing the situation for a long time. The heaven-bearing effect floating mirror had been suspended in the air above the plaza this entire time, and it was constantly spinning like a top while releasing some kind of unknown energy fluctuations into the outside world. From the looks of it, the soul mirror seemed to be in use right now. Chun-Shi had been imprisoned in the dark space for 200 years, so he had no idea how much time had passed in the outside world. However, seeing that the heavenly venerates and the 5 divine generals were still on Dragonhead Peak, Chun-Shi was extremely hopeful. He could only pray that there was still time. Yingying's soul wouldn't dissipate as long as the soul bridge wasn't completed. As such, he had to take the soul mirror. Even if he couldn't, he had to disrupt the ceremony today. From beginning to end, Chun-Shi's goal had always been resolute. In order to successfully approach the soul mirror, Chun-Shi had even used himself as bait to take on the 3 divine flames head-on. He then pretended to be defeated in order to make the 3 heavenly venerates let their guard down. After all, no one would have thought that everything he was doing was for the soul mirror. On Dragonhead Peak, Chun-Shi charged toward the soul mirror as quickly as he could in his entire life. The 3 heavenly venerates were flying in the sky, and even though they understood his intentions, it was already too late for them to stop him. The only ones who could stop Chun Shi were the 5 divine generals who were closest to the soul mirror. The divine generals naturally had varying cultivation bases. Some were early Yuanying, while others were peak Yuanying. In short, none of them were weaker than Yuanying. However, when Chun Shi was faced with these Yuanying, it was as if he had been injected with stimulants, and he instantly unleashed an astonishing aura that was far more powerful than before. Peak Soul Formation Stage. Blood Essence Ignition. Chun Shi had just consumed a complete nourishment pill refined from the Adumbra flower not long ago. However, this medicinal effect alone was not enough to make up for the loss of blood essence. At best, it could only heal his internal injuries and provide a little help for Chun Shi to condense another drop of blood essence. Chun Shi had already burned 2 drops of blood essence before, so this was the last drop of blood essence in his body. Once this drop of blood essence was completely burned out, Chun Shi would fall into an extremely weak state. If he wasn't careful, he might even die. Because of this, did he regret it? He would never regret it. Even if I die, I will not let my heart be covered in dust. One thing to note here is, even though Chun Shi had burned his blood essence and was ready to cut off all means of retreat, he had never thought of dying here, because he still had to go home. He would go back to visit Yingying and take care of Yinyan. The family of 3 still had a lot of happiness to enjoy. Therefore, he could not die here. Perhaps it was because Chun Shi was almost obsessed with going home, that the aura he unleashed from burning his blood essence was far more powerful than when he was at his peak. In fact, he was even more powerful than the divine monarch Chun Shi of the heavenly Jade Realm, who wielded the Tian Yin divine sword. When a person had a firm belief in their heart, they were invincible. Even though he was surrounded by dozens of nascent soul cultivators, Chun Shi was not the slightest bit afraid. Instead, like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, he sent the dozens of cultivators in front of him flying at the same time. The 3 divine flames were still burning fiercely on his body, but Chun Shi didn't seem to feel any pain at all. His surging true essence was also strangely seeping with blood energy. In this state where blood and fire intertwined, Chun Shi was on the brink of insanity. After using brute force to clear the obstacles in front of him, he abruptly pounced toward the soul mirror. The soul mirror was still spinning in midair. Chun Shi could even clearly see the patterns on the mirror. However, just as his fingers were about to touch the soul mirror, this primordial treasure that had saved the primordial immortal cultivators suddenly emitted an extremely dazzling light. Chun Shi didn't even have time to react before this ray of light was like a battering ram, violently sending him flying. Chun Shi spat out a mouthful of blood as he crashed heavily to the ground. Chun Shi didn't stop as he looked at the invisible wall in front of him. He immediately flew up as soon as he landed and charged toward the soul mirror again. It was clear that the soul mirror was protected by a spell formation. Under normal circumstances, Chun Shi might have been able to think of a way to break the spell formation. However, in today's situation, he could only rely on brute force to break the spell formation. Without any hesitation, the image of the divine sword appeared in Chun Shi's hand again. It was just a defensive spell formation. Even if the Tai Ching sacred ancestor was here, Chun Shi would still destroy it. Break! As Chun Shi swung his sword, countless images of the divine sword appeared in the air. The 3rd technique of the Moonlight Sword Technique, 10,000 Swords of Origin. An endless stream of sword shadows rose up like a long dragon and crashed into the spell formation, protecting the soul mirror. Each sword represented a single collision. When the first sword smashed into the array and shattered, the second sword followed closely behind. One sword after another, it was an endless stream of attacks. The sword shadows would not stop until the spell formation was broken. In the blink of an eye, the spell formation had been struck thousands of times, and each time, it was at the same spot. Chun Shi was trying to break the spell formation with a single point. Even though the spell formation had been set up by the sacred ancestor many years ago, It was beginning to falter in the face of such violent attacks. How could the three heavenly venerables allow Chun-Shi to break the spell formation so easily? Thus, while Chun-Shi was busy hacking at the spell formation, the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man crashed into Chun-Shi's back. Bam! With a loud bang, the power of the three lanterns crashed into Chun-Shi's body. This was the combined attack of three soul formation cultivators. However, Chun-Shi gritted his teeth and endured it. He was still in the same position as before. The moment the three lanterns hit him, Chun-Shi did not resist at all. Instead, he used his body as a medium to increase the power of the spell formation by 30%. Break! Chun-Shi roared angrily, and a crack appeared in the spell formation protecting the soul mirror. Seeing this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but smile. He didn't care how serious his injuries were. He swung the sword in his hand and viciously slashed at the damned mirror. The first technique of the Moonlight Sword technique, Hidden Void Sword. After exhausting all of his true essence to slash out this sword strike, Chun-Shi's heart that had been tightly wounded finally relaxed. At this moment, he was very calm and relaxed, because he really did his best. Chun-Shi didn't look at the soul mirror again. Instead, he turned around and looked behind him. As he turned around, the shadows of the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man appeared clearly in his eyes, and they became bigger and bigger. Chun-Shi smiled and didn't resist anymore. He just calmly closed his eyes. Ying, I'm sorry. I failed to keep our promise. Yin, I'm sorry. Daddy can't take care of you anymore. The three lanterns came crashing down. However, Chun-Shi calmly opened his arms and began to recall the happy memories of the past. He was very tired. It was time to rest. The only regret was, I might not be able to see you again. I'm sorry, the two women I love the most in my life. There was no end, and there was no messy ending. Don't be agitated. Don't be angry. Let's talk nicely. Please remember the domain name of this book.com, the mobile version of this book.com. Chapter 424. On Dragonhead Peak. The array formation protecting the soul mirror was actually set up by the Grand Pure One himself. Although many years had passed, and the power of the array was no longer what it used to be, it was not something a peak soul formation cultivator could easily break. Under the state of burning essence blood, if Chun-Shi was determined to run, the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man would not be able to easily hit him. However, he did not run. Instead, he gritted his teeth and endured the combined attack of the three celestial venerables. He used his body as a medium and successfully transferred the power of the three celestial venerables to the array formation. With the combination of the two, the array formation was immediately broken. Defensive formations generally had a self-healing ability, so even if the formation was broken, this small hole, which was only an inch wide, would quickly heal. At that moment, there was not much time left for Chun-Shi to react. There were actually only two choices left for him. He could leave decisively before his blood essence was completely burned and find an opportunity to return to Dragonhead Peak in the future to take revenge. Or he could fight to the death and use this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to destroy the soul mirror in one fell swoop. Chun-Shi did not know when Heaven Capital would be able to build the Soul Bridge. If the Soul Bridge was built quickly, then what should he use to save Ying? Wouldn't everything still be back to square one? Therefore, he chose the second method. Instead of running, he resolutely swung the sword in his hand. He, who was already covered in wounds, completely lost the ability to resist after using all his strength to swing the sword. This was the core of the entire great world, and also the most noble place in Heaven Capital. In addition to the three celestial venerables who were eager to take him down, there were also countless 5 divine generals and Rakshasa Starlords watching from his side. Chun-Shi chose his lover, and gave himself up. After all, the 3 celestial venerables were not wooden dummies. Naturally, they would not give him time to think calmly. When Chun-Shi decided to swing that sword, the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man once again smashed towards him. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover? Human nature could not withstand the test. Perhaps if the scene was different, Chunshi would not necessarily give himself up to save Qin Ruoying. But at least at this moment, he still bravely shouted that, "I am willing." Compared to everyone present, Chunshi's cultivation was indeed very high, but he was not at the invincible Vajra level. Without the protection of a magic treasure, how could the combined attack of 3 celestial venerables be so easy to withstand? He had already taken it head-on twice, so when he saw the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man smashing toward him again, Chunshi calmly closed his eyes. The 3 lanterns came crashing down. She could even clearly feel a wave of heat hitting his face. After that, the dazzling flames swallowed him up like a ferocious beast from the primordial times. Boom! A huge explosion rang out from the Dragon Head Peak once again, causing the entire floating island to tremble violently. The place where Chunshi was standing suddenly burst into flames. The fire was extremely ferocious. Whether it was the air or the bricks, everything was ignited at the slightest touch. If it weren't for the Imperial Extreme Hall being protected by a grand array, it would have long been turned into ruins by the raging flames. When the surrounding heaven and earth spirit chi had been burned out, a vacuum appeared in the square. The fire filled the line of sight. Yuhuan Tianzuan had been using his divine sense to observe Chun-Shi's situation. In his perception, Chun-Shi's aura was getting weaker and weaker, and he estimated that it wouldn't be long before he was completely burned to ashes. Thus, Yuhuan Tianzuan filled the square with soul-summoning banners, as if he had set up an inescapable net. As long as Chun-Shi's primordial spirit left his body, the soul-summoning banners would directly detain him and leave him for Yuhuan Tianzuan to slowly torture in the future. Without his physical body, no matter how strong Chun-Shi was, he was just a tiger without teeth and claws. When the time came, wouldn't he be at his mercy? It had to be said that Yuhuan Tianzuan's idea was indeed very good. But he waited for a long time, and even when Chun-Shi's aura had completely disappeared, he still didn't see Chun-Shi's primordial spirit fly out of the flames. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately frowned and hurriedly recalled the myriad spirit ancient E with a lapis lazuli lamp, then carefully searched the square. The square was surrounded by soul-summoning banners. As long as Chun-Shi's primordial spirit left his body, it would definitely be captured by the soul-summoning banners. Chun-Shi was already in a state of exhaustion, so his primordial spirit should be very weak. How could it have silently escaped from under his nose? What's going on? Where is he? Where did his primordial spirit go? After being hit by Chun-Shi's sword, the soul mirror fell to the ground like a broken mirror, motionless. And where Chun-Shi had been, at this moment, there was nothing but a charred ground. The 3 celestial venerables carefully looked around. In the end, it was celestial venerable wondrous spells who broke the silence first. Could it be that his primordial spirit didn't leave his body? Instead, it turned into ashes along with his body? A trace of anger flashed across Yuhuan Tianzuan's face when he heard this. He couldn't help but flick his sleeves. Impossible. This person's cultivation is unparalleled. Does he not understand the principle of sacrificing the rook to save the king? His primordial spirit must be hidden somewhere here. Perhaps he used some secret technique to hide it from us. Generals, listen up. Today, even if we have to turn Dragon Head Peak upside down, we must find that bastard's primordial spirit. Yes, sir. Following Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan's command, the Divine Generals and Star Venerates who had been watching for the sidelines all rushed to the plaza and began a vigorous cleaning. He was certain that Chun-Shi's primordial spirit was still in the array, so he was determined to find Chun-Shi. In fact, the moment the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man blasted toward Chun-Shi, Chun-Shi's figure strangely disappeared. Not only did the 3 celestial venerables not notice anything strange, but even Chun-Shi himself didn't notice anything strange. Chun-Shi closed his eyes and waited for death. The pain he imagined did not come for a long time. When he opened his eyes again, there was only darkness in front of him. Yuhuan Tianzuan was gone. Dragon Head Peak was gone. Even the entire Great World was gone. There was only endless darkness in front of him. Chun-Shi was all too familiar with this kind of darkness. Why am I back here again? Chun-Shi was startled, countless thoughts flashing through her mind in an instant. Could it be that he had been in this dark space all this time? He had never left at all? Everything he had experienced before. Was it all an illusion? How could it be? Chun-Shi instinctively wanted to fly up and take a look. At this moment, he suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain from his body, along with a familiar burning sensation. Thus, Chun-Shi immediately checked his condition and confirmed that these injuries were caused by the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. In other words, everything he had experienced before was not an illusion. So, did he return to that endless space of darkness? Thinking of this, Chun-Shi's heart suddenly felt as if stormy waves had been set off. She couldn't figure out what was going on. This place was really too strange. Just as Chun-Shi was puzzled, a woman's voice suddenly rang in his ears. Do you regret it? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor mobile version website. Chapter 425. Do you regret it? In the endless darkness, a woman's voice suddenly rang softly in Chun-Shi's ears. The woman's voice was gentle and soft, and there seemed to be some sadness and sorrow lingering in it. And it was such a seemingly simple question. In Chun-Shi's ears, it was no less than thunder in the sky. Who's talking? At this moment, Chun-Shi was like a cat with its hair standing on end. His body shook violently, and a ring-shaped true origin light pillar suddenly flew out of his body. The light pillar dispelled the darkness, and also calmed Chun-Shi down a little. Then, he focused and held his breath and began to look around vigilantly. Chun-Shi was very familiar with this mysterious dark space that had imprisoned him for 200 years. Just like the last time he was here, there was nothing in this place. There was no light, no air, no radiation, no magnetic field. There was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. But the woman's voice just now was so real, as if she was leaning against his ear and whispering softly. For safety reasons, Chun-Shi immediately released his divine sense, and with himself as the center, he carefully explored the darkness. But in this endless darkness, there was not even a speck of dust, let alone a person who could speak. Could it be that I'm hallucinating? Chun-Shi was somewhat uncertain. After all, he had experienced too many strange things, and his brain could no longer react. But just as he was feeling puzzled, the woman's voice rang again. Do you regret it? This time, Chun-Shi finally heard it clearly. He was not hallucinating, and there was really someone leaning against his ear and whispering softly. After confirming that he did not hear wrongly, Chun-Shi's heart suddenly trembled violently, because he had no idea where the voice came from. It felt as if a female ghost was leaning on his back, asking him if he had eaten dinner today, and he turned around to look for her, but he could not see the female ghost. How could Chun-Shi not be surprised? There is actually someone in this world who could approach him silently, and he could not sense the other party's presence at all? How is that possible? After all, no matter how severe his injuries were, he was still at the peak of the divine transformation stage. However, he was unable to detect this woman's aura at all. He couldn't even pinpoint the direction of her voice. Who is it? Are you talking to me? Can you show yourself? Chun-Shi asked her question towards the void. The woman did not answer him. After a while, the woman's voice sounded again. Do you regret it? It was still the same problem. This made Chun-Shi suddenly realize the woman's tone was exactly the same as the previous 2 times. He felt that she was like a recorder that could only repeat the same sentence over and over again. Regret what? Do you regret it? I don't understand what you mean. Can you be more specific? Do you regret it? F***CK. Do you regret it? Do you regret it? No matter what Chun-Shi said, women would always say the same thing. Therefore, Chun-Shi thought about it seriously. He was a coding farmer, so he was naturally very familiar with mechanical commands. Therefore, Chun-Shi was very suspicious that this woman should be a reflection left behind by a senior expert. She did not have the ability to think and could only follow the program's settings mechanically. If the woman's question was the username, then Chun-Shi's answer was obviously the password. Only by providing the correct password could he successfully log into the account and proceed with the next step. Therefore, when the woman asked again, Chun-Shi answered decisively, "I don't regret it." He originally just wanted to verify his guess. Who would have thought? The moment the words, "I don't regret it," blurted out, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down from the endless dark space. The lightning came extremely quickly. Before Chun-Shi could even react, the lightning had already struck not far in front of him. In front of him was an empty dark void. However, after the lightning struck, it seemed to have struck something and instantly exploded into a large ball of purple flames. The scene in front of him was simply too strange. Chun-Shi subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave, only to find that he could not move his body. At this moment, the ball of purple flames floating in the void slowly drifted toward him. Chun-Shi watched as the flames gradually approached him. He tried his best to break free, but his body seemed to have been separated from his soul and did not listen to his commands at all. One had to know that he was at the peak of the soul formation stage. At this moment, he was like a puppet that was being manipulated by someone at will. Faced with such a strange situation, Chun-Shi suddenly had a human emotion that had not appeared in hundreds of years: confusion and helplessness. Confusion and uneasiness. Humans were always afraid of things that they did not know, and Chun-Shi was no exception. It was also at this moment that he finally realized how insignificant he was. So what if he was at the soul formation stage? The purple flames were getting closer and closer to Chun-Shi. It was only when they were about to touch him that the purple flames suddenly stopped. Then, under Chun-Shi's dumbfounded expression, a shackled arm covered in scars suddenly stretched out from the flames. First it was the left hand, then the right hand. Like Sadako crawling out of a TV, the person slowly crawled out of the flames along with the clanking sound of the shackles. Perhaps it was because of the spell, but Chun-Shi could not see the person's face at all, so he could only judge based on the slender figure and the high bulging chest. The person in front of him should be a woman. The way the woman appeared was very strange, but what really shocked Chun-Shi was the way the woman was dressed. He saw that her wrists, ankles, neck, waist, abdomen, ribs, and shoulder blades were all locked in shackles. 9 chains thicker than her arms were connected to the shackles. So every time the woman moved, the chains all over her body would jingle nonstop. Her clothes were ragged, and Chun-Shi could even see half of her chest. And the parts of her body that were not covered by clothes were full of terrifying scars. Chun-Shi was stunned. The woman's appearance was completely different from what he had imagined. He originally thought that the other party was some hidden expert, at least at the same level as the Tai Ching divine ancestor, so she could easily bring him here from the Dragon Head Peak. Who would have thought that this woman was dressed like a prisoner? Chun-Shi stared at the woman in front of him in a daze, and only a blank was left in his mind. And at this moment, the woman who crawled out of the flames directly pressed her blurry face against Chun-Shi's face and then asked again, "Are you willing?" Chapter 426. Are you willing? Even though the woman's face was only 2 or 3 centimeters away from Chun-Shi, he still couldn't see the woman's face clearly. He only felt that his vision was blurry, and he couldn't even distinguish her facial features. It felt like a thick layer of mosaic. Chun-Shi didn't know what the woman wanted to ask, but he didn't dare to answer. After all, he didn't even know what the woman was asking. What if he answered wrongly? A bank card password would be temporarily frozen if it was entered wrongly 3 times, not to mention this strange and mysterious woman in front of him. Although the woman was close, Chun-Shi couldn't feel any trace of her existence. There was no body temperature, no breath, no sound, and no smell. Whether it was breath, or aura, this woman had none of that. She was like a lifeless, still painting. As long as Chun-Shi closed his eyes, he wouldn't be able to sense the woman's existence. But as soon as he opened his eyes, the woman's blurry face would immediately appear in front of him. Are you willing? Just like before, the woman waited for about 2 minutes. After seeing that she didn't answer, she asked again. Her voice was still so gentle and soft. After she heard this, the pressure in his heart increased. Should he answer? Or should he not answer? She was tied to the ground by the woman. Other than his head, his body was completely out of his control. This stalemate obviously wasn't a good idea. So, after she thought about it again and again, he asked tentatively, "Dare I ask? What's your question?" "There's only one question. Are you willing or not?" "How can I answer that?" She originally only wanted to test her, to see if the woman would still ask questions mechanically like before. But he didn't expect that after the woman listened. Her head suddenly moved slightly, as if she was looking at him up and down. Seeing this, she suddenly had a guess in his mind. This woman didn't seem to be a simple reflection. Sure enough, after the woman looked at him up and down, she asked the question, "Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover?" "I'm willing." As soon as the woman finished speaking, she gave the answer decisively. Wasn't this nonsense? If it wasn't for Ying, how could he be easily defeated by 3 heavenly masters? She could be considered to have walked through the gates of hell. Although he couldn't figure out why he suddenly returned to the dark space, it didn't stop she from making bold guesses. This must have something to do with this mysterious woman. Since the woman had brought him back from the gates of hell, she probably wasn't just playing with him for fun. Therefore, after much consideration, she decided to answer the woman's question first. He also wanted to see what strange reaction the woman would have next. However, what she didn't expect. He gave the answer, but the woman did not respond at all, as if a computer had crashed. She was depressed. After 2 or 3 minutes, the woman she slowly raised her right hand and gently placed it on she's cheek. The arm that was shackled and covered in scars was so real. However, she didn't feel like he was being touched by a foreign object. This scene was very strange. It was like the sun shining on the arm, and then the shadow of the arm was reflected on she's face. She couldn't feel the woman touching him at all. However, his eyes could clearly see that the woman's palm was continuously caressing his face. What's going on? The woman's behavior made she very uncomfortable. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only watch as he was being molested. He was at the peak of the soul formation stage, but now he was reduced to such a state. It was really sad and lamentable. Since he couldn't resist, he could only endure silently. She closed his eyes with a numb expression, but his mind was working quickly. Everything in front of him was too strange. Even with his experience, he couldn't figure out what kind of existence this woman was. This scene was very similar to how he treated his sister-in-law in the past. Didn't Shueching, who was still an ordinary warrior, also let she do whatever he wanted? The peak strength did not understand the world of the soul formation stage. Just like the soul formation stage did not understand the world of the void realm. Even when facing his master, she didn't feel so lost. So it was obvious. This mysterious woman in front of him, she might not just be a void realm expert. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but open his eyes and keep looking at the woman in front of him. He was trying to find a secret from the woman. But at this moment, in the depths of the endless void, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down. The moment the lightning flashed, not only was she shocked, but even the woman seemed to be shocked. The woman hurriedly turned her head to look, and the chains on her body suddenly made a ding, ding, dang, dang sound. Then, Shi's divine sense seemed to have been electrified, and he finally detected a trace of vital essence fluctuation in the depths of the void. This fluctuation was extremely violent, and it could be said to be, the sky fell and the earth cracked. It was earth-shattering. The first bolt of lightning had just disappeared, and it was followed by another bolt of lightning. One bolt after another, and it didn't stop at all. In just a few breaths, there were hundreds and thousands of bolts of lightning striking the depths of the void. The bright light of the lightning was particularly dazzling in the darkness. In each bolt of lightning, there seemed to be a huge wave of vital essence fluctuation. She had never seen such an exaggerated wave of vital essence fluctuation, and he only felt that he was so small in front of this wave of energy. It was as panicked as an ordinary person facing the brilliant power of heaven. There was a great terror in the depths of the void. It was like a puppy facing a tiger, or a grass snake facing a dragon. The strong pressure brought about by the difference in realm almost made Chun-Shi breathless. Pressure was a very mysterious thing. Here was an example. When Chun-Shi faced a group of martial artists on Earth who didn't know anything, as long as he deliberately showed a trace of hostility, the other party would be so scared that they would piss their pants and probably not even be able to stand properly. This was pressure. This special phenomenon would only occur when there was an absolute difference in realm between two people. It came from the instinct of life, so even immortal cultivators were no exception. Even though Chun-Shi had stayed in the heavenly jade world for a whole 500 years, he had never seen such a strong pressure. This big shot who suddenly appeared in the depths of the void. Was he just at the insightful void realm? Even if someone said that he was a tribulation true immortal, Chun-Shi would still believe it. And while Chun-Shi was struggling to resist the strong pressure, the chains on the woman's body suddenly tightened, and an unknown force was trying to pull her back into the purple flame. The woman tried to struggle, but the 9 chains on her body seemed to be electrified. The more she struggled, the more pain the chains would bring her. Finally, the woman couldn't hold on any longer. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the purple flame by the chains, the woman suddenly stretched out her right hand and then pointed at Chun-Shi's forehead. Chapter 427. In the depths of the void, dazzling lightning flashed one after another. Although there was no sound of thunder, every time the lightning flashed, it would set off a huge wave of vital essence. A strong pressure kept surging from the darkness. Chun-Shi was in the middle of this pressure. He only felt that he was now like a small sampan floating in the sea and could be crushed into powder by the stormy waves at any time. Chun-Shi struggled against the invisible pressure from the depths of the void. The woman struggled against the 9 chains on her body. There seemed to be an unknown power in the purple flame, and it was this power that restrained the mysterious woman in front of him. The woman struggled frantically, but these 9 chains seemed to be wrapped around the capstan of an ancient city gate. Every time the capstan turned, the chains would tighten inch by inch toward the purple flame. Purple flame, azure lightning. The mysterious woman, 9 chains. Everything looked so strange. But the really strange thing was, no matter how shocking the scene in front of Chun-Shi was, he did not hear any strange sounds. Except for the occasional clanging of the chains, Chun-Shi could not hear any sound. The dark space was still so quiet. Even if the woman seemed to be howling at the sky, Chun-Shi did not hear any sound she made. It was as if he was deaf. Apart from that strong pressure, even his divine sense could not detect any unusual fluctuations. What was happening in front of him? It was completely beyond the scope of Chun-Shi's understanding. The lightning flashed faster and faster, and the purple flame grew stronger and stronger. The woman was gradually unable to hold on, but the moment she was about to be pulled back into the flame, the woman's right index finger suddenly pointed between Chun-Shi's eyebrows. At that moment, Chun-Shi suddenly felt a bone-piercing chill. It was as if his eyebrows had suddenly touched a piece of ice. It was so cold that he could not help but shiver. Then, Chun-Shi did not even have time to react. The past events of his life rushed to his mind like a tide and appeared in front of him one by one. It was like a movie that started rewinding at 32 times the speed of the movie when the ending was clearly shown. From Longzhou Peak to Daiyu Island, from Shangjing to Zhonghai, from Tianxian to Earth, Chun-Shi also reverted from soul formation to Yuanying, then to Golden Core and Foundation Establishment, and finally back to being an ordinary person. The timeline was reversed, and the past was still vivid in his mind. Chun-Shi was like a spectator sitting in front of the TV, watching his life in a daze. Soon, the movie returned to the beginning. It was the scene when he worked overtime until late at night and couldn't get a taxi, so he could only run home in the rain. A bolt of lightning struck down. The image stopped abruptly. "It's you." He turned around and looked at her with a gentle gaze. However, in the blink of an eye, his thoughts had already turned 1,000 times. Chun-Shi gaped at the mysterious woman in front of him. He had thousands of questions in his heart, but before he could ask, the woman was dragged back into the flames by the chains. And the moment the woman entered the flames, she seemed to have heard Chun-Shi's voice, so a faint smile appeared on her originally pained face. Although Chun-Shi couldn't see the woman's face, he could clearly feel that the woman seemed to be smiling at him. Finally, the woman's figure was swallowed by the purple flames. The lightning in the distance disappeared in a flash. After the purple flames fluttered for a moment, they instantly disappeared like fireworks. And as the flames went out, the pressure that came from the depths of the void also slowly faded. Chun-Shi was like a spectator, staring blankly as the darkness enveloped him again. Everything returned to silence. He could finally move again. Huff, huff, huff. As soon as he was free, Chun-Shi couldn't help but start to pant heavily. Although the strong pressure had disappeared, he still hadn't recovered from the fear. Chun-Shi forced himself to calm down a little, then sat cross-legged in the void. And at this moment, Chun-Shi suddenly realized that his injuries had healed and the true origin in his body was abundant, almost at the peak. What was going on? Could it be that the woman cured him before she left? Thinking of this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but be shocked, and he suddenly had an illusion that he was trapped in a deadly illusion. Illusion attacks the heart, and attacking the heart was the most important thing. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally there was no reference. After Chun-Shi's strength recovered, everything seemed to return to the moment when he opened the gate of heaven with his sword and fell into the dark space. So he couldn't help but wonder if he had fallen into some kind of illusion again. Everything that he had experienced before, was it all just an illusion? This guess was actually very reasonable. After all, illusion arrays were usually more terrifying than killing arrays. However, Chun-Shi immediately rejected this guess. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The pressure was so real, and the woman's existence was so real. No illusion could be so realistic, so everything that he had experienced just now was definitely real. Chun-Shi had encountered the insightful void before, because his master was at the insightful void. And Chun-Shi had been lucky enough to see the Dao integration above the insightful void. However, even a Dao integration stage senior wouldn't be able to exert such terrifying pressure on him. So, the great terror that was emitting such a strong pressure in the depths of the void was definitely not at the insightful void stage. It might even surpass the Dao integration and reach the legendary tribulation bath. Immortal cultivation, immortal cultivation. This was the real, immortal. Chun-Shi didn't sense any aura from the woman, but just based on the 9 chains on her body and the move she showed before she left, Chun-Shi had reason to believe that this woman should be at the same level as that great terror. Moreover, this mysterious woman seemed to have an inexplicable kindness toward him, coupled with her last finger. Chun-Shi instantly had a guess in his heart. Could it be the reason why he went to the heavenly jade world for no reason? Everything was because of this mysterious woman just now. Chun-Shi's heart was filled with questions. But no matter how hard he racked his brains, he still couldn't figure out the reason. There were still too few clues. One had to know that this was an important figure that only existed in myths and legends, and he was lucky enough to come into close contact with her today. Although he only said a few words, he resisted a strong pressure. But for Chun-Shi, who was already at the soul formation stage, this kind of experience was very rare. So, he immediately sat cross-legged in the void and began to carefully recall the entire process of the woman's appearance. He tried to gain some experience from it, but he didn't expect that when he sat down for a whole 300 years. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 428. In the Dark Space. Chun-Shi used a strand of true essence to create a very crude timer, and then he completely went into seclusion. After his previous experience, he didn't dare to waste his true essence at all. Instead, He entered the state of tortoise rest from the beginning and kept thinking about everything he just saw in his mind. The reason why the woman didn't have any aura on her was that she had an inexplicable kindness toward Chun-Shi from the beginning, so she deliberately restrained her aura. If the woman was a prisoner, then the great terror that appeared later was obviously the prison guard guarding the prisoner. These were two great figures who had the ability to reach the heavens and penetrate the earth. Chun-Shi couldn't figure it out, so he focused all his energy on himself. And what he just experienced also made Chun-Shi realize for the first time that soul formation was too weak. So weak that even if he came to Heaven Capital, he couldn't get the soul mirror and save Ying. He was so weak that he could only tremble and be at a loss under the terrifying pressure of others. Chun-Shi really didn't like this feeling, so he wanted to use this opportunity to get close to the two great figures to break through to the insightful emptiness realm in one go. Strength was always relative. In the heavenly Jade world, he was the Dawn Divine Lord who oversaw a region. On earth, he was a god who was above ordinary people. But in Heaven Capital, he found that he couldn't deal with the siege of the 10 celestial venerables and 5 divine generals by himself. As for the great terror of the mysterious woman, she was a terrifying existence that Chun-Shi didn't even dare to think about before. The comfortable life made Chun-Shi gradually forget the first rule, which was natural selection, survival of the fittest. Chun-Shi had a monthly salary of more than 10,000, and his life in a small county was too comfortable. But for big cities like Shangjing and Zhonghai, what was more than 10,000 a month? To put it bluntly, in fact, he had lowered his own level, which was why he was able to live a carefree life. You have your pursuits, and I have my choices. So Chun-Shi's previous idea wasn't wrong. His mistake was the development and progress of society would not stop because of a single person. Following the birth of a child, the price of housing skyrocketed. Even if they were hiding in a small county town with a monthly income of more than 10,000, they began to struggle to make ends meet. When Chun-Shi could no longer protect his family with his current strength, that would be when he made a grave mistake. Chun-Shi realized his mistake, which was why he was so eager to break through to the insightful emptiness realm. It was the same as when he was eager to break through to the divine transformation realm and step on the path home. Fortunately, as long as a man was willing to work hard, it was never too late. Ren Zhengfei founded Huawei at the age of 43. Zhong Qingho founded Waha at the age of 44. Then there was Colonel Sanders of the United States, who didn't even start KFC until he was 66. I was once dressed in fine clothes and riding a horse, young and frivolous. Now he's working diligently, and a great talent is a late success. While Chun-Shi was trying his best to comprehend the true meaning of the word void in the dark space, the little fellow was also gradually adapting to her new life without the company of her parents. As usual, the little fellow made many video calls to Chun-Shi every day. For this reason, Wu Yin even specially invited a child psychologist from the Capital University to deal with the little fellow's overflowing yearning at any time. The little fellow was like Truman in the movie The Truman Show, living in a fairy tale world that Wu Yin carefully created for her. She gradually got used to video calls with her father and also gradually got used to her mother's deep sleep. But unfortunately, communication through video calls couldn't compare to the company of real people after all. When the child no longer cried and insisted that her father come home, it meant that her heart had begun to close up. As soon as the video call ended, the smile on the little fellow's face would visibly diminish. She no longer liked new toys, and she no longer clamored to play in the ice rink. If the two brothers didn't come to the courtyard to play with her every day, rain or shine, her entire childhood would probably be much dimmer. Toys, cartoons, Big Cat, and the two brothers had already formed the entire content of the little fellow's life. Grandpa was very good to her. Although Grandpa was often in a daze alone and accidentally neglected her existence, the little fellow could still feel Grandpa's deep care for her in her heart. But this care was more like the feeling that Aunt Zhang once gave her rather than the feeling that her parents once gave her. Only when one once had something would one know what it meant to lose it. She began to like holding her phone in a daze in the room alone. Because she grew up, she naturally began to have troubles. Time flew by. It was a new year. Aunt Zhang was very puzzled as to why she didn't call her this year. So as soon as the spring festival was over, the old lady took the initiative to call Shi. Unexpectedly, the old lady was fooled by Wang Chunjiu, saying that Shi and his family were traveling abroad and wouldn't be back for a long time. Aunt Zhang naturally believed this. So after a series of instructions on the phone, she completely dispelled the idea of visiting the little fellow in Beijing. Even a snail would leave a white mark when it crawled past, let alone a person. Shi's sudden disappearance also completely shattered the network of contacts he had built before. Of course, for him, this kind of network was actually dispensable. But for Nian, a child who grew up relying on her parents' network, all of this was indeed a little too cruel. In the blink of an eye, spring passed and summer arrived. Nian was also 6 years old. Perhaps because of his age, Qin Yongyan usually didn't care about any holidays except for the spring festival. If the little fellow hadn't suddenly asked when she came home from school, Qin Yongyan would have even forgotten that he had to celebrate a child's birthday. May 5th. Wasn't today Nianyan's birthday? After looking at the calendar, Qin Yongyan slapped his forehead and realized. After comforting the little fellow for a while, he hurriedly rushed out to buy her a cake. To be honest, although Qin Yongyan had a scholarly, easygoing, and otherworldly temperament, he was actually a straight man of steel. A straight man. Usually, he only knew how to practice martial arts. But now, he suddenly wanted him to make the child happy. Wasn't this making things difficult for him? If the little girl in the cake shop didn't kindly remind him, Qin Yongyan wouldn't even know to prepare 6 candles for Nianyan. Fortunately, Nianyan's temperament had changed. If it was when she was still alive, this little thing would immediately cry out of grievance. Nianyan didn't cry. After seeing her grandfather lighting the candles in a hurry, she followed what her mother taught her before, closed her eyes, and seriously made a wish. Her wish was very simple. That was, she hoped that her father could come back soon. Therefore, after simply eating a few mouthfuls of cake, the little fellow let Qin Yongyan accompany her to sing Insects Fly, just like how she used to celebrate her birthday. The dark sky was low, followed by the bright stars. Insects fly, who are you thinking of? The stars in the sky shed tears, the roses on the ground withered. The cold wind blows, as long as you accompany me. Chapter 429. Nianyan was 6 years old. Without the company of her parents, the boring time seemed to pass faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the little girl had already graduated from Donghuimen kindergarten. It was time for her to go to primary school. August 30th, reporting day. Early in the morning, after Qin Yongyan helped the little girl wash up, the two of them got on the bus and then went to the primary school affiliated to Capital University, located near Zuanwoman. This was the growth path that she had planned for the little girl a long time ago. Therefore, after Nianyan graduated from Donghuimen kindergarten, she didn't even have to go for an interview. She directly got a place to enroll in Capital University affiliated primary school. And because of her, the two brothers naturally easily got 2 very precious places. Because they had been living with Xia Kaiji recently, the two brothers couldn't report with Nianyan today. They could only arrange to meet her at the reporting office later. Qin Yongyan originally thought that Nianyan would inevitably feel a little scared and even unwilling to go to school when she suddenly changed to an unfamiliar environment. Therefore, before they left, Qin Yongyan was actually mentally prepared for a tough battle. But what he never expected was, after Nianyan walked into this unfamiliar school, her face didn't have the usual fear and uneasiness that was commonly seen on other children. Instead, it was like she was touring a park. While she walked slowly to the reporting office, her eyes were constantly looking at the classmates who passed by her. To be honest, with her calm appearance, she didn't look like a first-grade child who had just entered school at all. Instead, she looked more like a 4- or fifth grade child, as one of the top experimental primary schools in the country. The Capital Affiliated Primary School was not a private school. Therefore, the moment one entered the school, it gave off a feeling of simple elegance with green bricks and gray tiles. There's also a quiet, beautiful, scholarly, and rich cultural atmosphere. This extremely scholarly atmosphere naturally formed a sharp contrast with the childlike atmosphere of the kindergarten. In addition, there was also a fundamental difference between primary school and kindergarten. After all, kindergarten was mainly for the experience of life, while primary school was where the real learning began, such as the timetable, work and rest schedule, exam results, homework, and other nightmarish things would also haunt them from this moment on until they became adults. And it was also from today onwards that Nian had a new identity, namely students. Yes, primary school students. Nian was assigned to Year 1, Class 2. This class assignment method was randomly assigned by the computer. So, after the little fellow sat in the classroom, she waited for a long time but did not see the brothers. Qin Yongyan asked the teacher and found out that the two brothers had been assigned to Year 1 Class 3 next door. It was a sad story. Qin Yongyan was worried that the little girl would be scared, so he quickly comforted her and promised that he would find a way to put her in the same class as the two brothers. Who would have thought that the little fellow only nodded blankly after hearing this, and did not show any extreme reaction. On the other hand, the two brothers in the next class were so anxious that they were about to cry because they couldn't find Nian. The first graders had just graduated from kindergarten, so they more or less carried the habits they had developed in kindergarten. Therefore, the classroom gradually quieted down after the homeroom teacher and the subject teacher arrived. The homeroom teacher first did a simple self-introduction, then began to distribute various kinds of information collection forms to the parents. This was the first time parents and teachers met. The first graders couldn't sit still, so the whole process didn't take very long. After the homeroom teacher took back the forms, she asked the parents to follow her to the multimedia classroom, where the school would officially hold a parent conference for the first graders. During this time, the children in each class had to stay in the classroom and be led by the teacher to play games with them. After the parent conference ended, the children would be familiar with the school environment, and the new students' registration would be completed successfully. They only had to wait for school to officially start the day after tomorrow. There were no problems with the school's arrangements. However, after Qin Yongyan followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, there was a small commotion in Year 1 Class 2. As for the reason for the commotion, it was completely because of an unlucky brat. After the parents followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, the children were guided by the teacher to play with plasticine. Nian was wearing a white dress today. Qin Ruoying personally picked it for her. With her rosy cheeks and big watery eyes, she looked very stunning. Yes, just like her mother back then. With such an outstanding appearance and a faint fragrance on her body, the boys in the class would peek at her from time to time from the moment she walked into the classroom. Children at this age still had a vague understanding of gender, and it was more out of curiosity. Beauty was innate because it was determined by genes. Most children would enter the aesthetic sensitivity stage when they were 3 years old. They would even choose colors that they liked, such as red, blue, etc. Therefore, don't think that children couldn't distinguish between beauty and ugliness. Not only did adults like beautiful women, but children also liked beautiful women. Nian was clearly a living beauty. Most children were very obedient, but there were always a few exceptions, which was commonly known as brats. Unfortunately, there was a brat sitting diagonally behind Nian. Although this brat was only 6 years old this year, he was very mischievous. He was not afraid of parents or teachers at all. It seemed that when he was in kindergarten, he was the tyrant of the class. Nian was so cute, so the brat naturally had his eyes on her from the beginning. Of course, this brat's heart was not as dirty and dark as the adults. He just instinctively wanted to get close to Nian. However, the way he approached others was completely unacceptable to ordinary people. This brat took advantage of the time when the teacher was teaching the other children to play with plasticine, to climb to the ground and quietly crawl behind Nian. He wanted to lift Nian's skirt, just like he used to lift other people's skirts. However, just as he held the little girl's skirt tightly with a smirk on his face, the little girl who was seriously playing with the plasticine seemed to have been prepared. She suddenly stood up from her seat and slapped him directly in the face. Slap! Nian Yin did not use much strength, but the crisp sound of the slap alarmed the entire classroom. The brat was stunned. He was stunned for a long time. When he saw the teacher rush over, the brat's grievance seemed to have found an outlet. He couldn't help but burst into tears. Chun Yin, what are you doing? Chapter 430. Chun Yin. Compared to the recently popular names like Zishuan, Sinny, Sahan, and Kursin, the little girl's name seemed particularly ordinary. But because of her outstanding appearance, the teacher remembered this child who was as cute as a porcelain doll at a glance. She didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but most people would discover a strange phenomenon during their school days, and that was a good-looking girl would usually be the class monitor of the class. Of course, the prerequisite was that the girl had self-respect and self-respect. Perhaps it was because their beautiful appearance gave them more attention, but at the same time, it also gave them more pressure. In addition, girls matured early, so these girls were usually more mature and sensible than ordinary children. Nian Yin's appearance was already very outstanding, and in addition, she was influenced by rich spirit energy all year round. So even if she didn't cultivate, she had a temperament that was far superior to other children her age. Therefore, the moment the teacher saw her, she had already listed the little girl as a candidate for class monitor. If her performance in the future was good and her results could keep up with the rest of the team, this position would obviously be decided internally. But no one would have thought that the little girl who easily gained the approval of all the teachers would beat another child to tears on the first day of school. The naughty child sat on the ground and cried loudly, while Nian Yin stood there and looked at him coldly. Seeing this, the teacher couldn't help but be angry, so she couldn't help but scold her. However, Nian Yin didn't defend herself. Instead, she pursed her lips and looked indifferent. School bullying was a situation that occurred in every school and even every class. As one of the top teachers in the country, the teachers of the capital-affiliated primary school naturally did a lot of research in this area. The naughty child deliberately cried loudly, hoping that the teacher would be biased towards him. Fortunately, the teacher wasn't a fool, so before confirming the truth, she didn't dare to make a conclusion. Seeing that Nian Yin didn't continue to beat him, the teacher came between the two children and patiently asked the reason. In fact, when the teacher realized that the naughty child wasn't in his seat, she had a guess in her heart. So, she immediately relaxed her expression and tried to communicate with the little girl. Chen Yin, tell me, why did you bully your classmate? Hearing this, the little girl pouted and replied stiffly, Daddy said that no one is allowed to lift my skirt. I'm a girl. Whoever lifts my skirt is a pervert. Dad said that this is a matter of principle, so I must give him a good thrashing. The little fellow's words were loud and clear, full of righteousness. After hearing this, the teacher didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was right, but how old was this child? How would she know anything about erotic things? It was probably just for fun. Teacher understood the entire process of what had happened. In such a situation, it was wrong to favor either side. The naughty brat had sneakily come over to lift her skirt, but he didn't expect that this time he would lift a steel plate. So she raised her hand and gave him a slap. It was wrong to lift her skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit her. Therefore, after the teacher pointed out the two children's mistakes, she asked them to apologize to each other. Chen Yin, if you encounter such a situation in the future, you can tell teacher directly. Teacher will definitely criticize him severely. But you have to remember, you're not allowed to hit anyone in the future, understand? The teacher felt that the nature of hitting someone was worse, so she asked Nian Yin to apologize to the naughty brat first. Unexpectedly, after Nian Yin heard this, she immediately frowned and replied stubbornly, I won't. He's a pervert. I don't want to apologize to a pervert. Perhaps it was because the movie Su Yuan had left a very serious psychological shadow on Chen Shi, so he had always been very concerned about the issue of indecency. Actually, to put it more bluntly, the naughty brat's behavior was indecent. Age wasn't a reason to make a mistake, nor was it an excuse to avoid making a mistake. Scourges were cultivated slowly. If a mistake was made and a random excuse was found to cover it up, there would obviously be more girls who would be unlucky in the future. Why did you not teach your child well? But my child was the one who was hurt. This was a matter of principle. Therefore, Chun-Shi's attitude had always been absolutely unforgivable, absolutely unforgiving. Nian had obviously inherited Chun-Shi's teachings. Therefore, when she heard that the teacher actually asked her to apologize to the naughty brat, Nian suddenly became confused. Pervert. Shameless. I'm not going to apologize to a pervert. Bah. The little girl's reaction was somewhat out of the teacher's expectations. She called him a pervert here and there, and the last bah deeply hurt the naughty brat who was lying on the ground pretending to be innocent. This was great. Seeing that the whole class was watching the show, the naughty brat who had to bear the name of pervert suddenly felt a little embarrassed. After all, he was still a child. The teacher was busy correcting Nian's mistake, so she didn't notice the naughty brat's thoughts. When the naughty brat saw that everyone seemed to be laughing at him, his mentality instantly exploded after a loud cry. He ran out of the classroom while crying. Well, this time he was really crying. Seeing this, the teacher quickly chased after him. But this naughty brat ran like a thief, and in a flash, he jumped into the multimedia classroom next door. The parents were having a meeting in the multimedia classroom, and this tragic cry immediately attracted everyone's attention. While everyone was still wondering what was going on outside, a rather good-looking young woman directly rushed out of the classroom. Nonsense. As a mother, how could she not know whose child was crying? As expected, as soon as the beautiful young woman went out, she saw the naughty brat who was covering his face and running wildly. Yang, come here, mommy is here. What's wrong? Who bullied you? Don't cry. Tell mommy. Mommy will help you. After seeing his mother, not only did the naughty brat not stop crying, but he also cried even more heartbreakingly. The naughty brat's cries echoed in the corridor classroom, as one could imagine how wronged he must have been. Fortunately, the school didn't officially start today, and in such a big school, there were only freshmen like them, or else where would the school put its face? The parent-teacher conference was forced to be suspended. The principal walked out of the multimedia classroom with a gloomy face. A group of head teachers and head teachers followed behind the principal expressionlessly, but in their hearts, they had already started cursing. Which class was this child from? Was the teacher who took care of this child an idiot? Didn't he know that today was the registration day? The principal had just introduced the school's teaching staff and teaching atmosphere to the parents. But in the end, the other side slapped their faces. The head teachers of each class silently prayed in their hearts, only hoping that this unlucky child was not from their class, the principal, teachers, parents. A group of people walked out of the multimedia classroom in such a grandiose manner. When a head teacher of Year 1 Class 2 realized that this naughty brat was actually from Year 1 Class 2, she fell silent. The head teachers of the other classes suddenly had a very strange expression on their faces. Hee, there's a good show to watch. Please remember the domain name of this book.com. Wonderful book mobile version website.com. Chapter 4:31. The naughty child cried until the sky darkened. No matter what the parents asked him, he just pointed at the classroom and kept sobbing. Looking at his pitiful appearance, those who didn't know would think that he had been wronged. It was normal for first graders to cry. It shouldn't have caused such a big commotion. Unfortunately, the child's mother wasn't someone to be trifled with. The teacher who rushed out tried to calm the situation, but the beautiful young woman didn't listen to her at all. Seeing that the child couldn't stop crying, the young woman took her son directly to the door of the multimedia classroom. Then, she squatted at the door and slowly coaxed her son. From the beginning to the end, she didn't say a word to the teacher. Instead, she silently comforted her son. And this was actually the highest level of shrew. She didn't make a fuss, she didn't hang herself, she just looked on coldly and laughed. She didn't even do anything hysterical or embarrassing. She just silently stood at the door with the child. At that moment, all the teachers present, including the principal, couldn't help but feel a little scared. They instantly understood that today's matter might not be easy to resolve. The naughty child's crying interrupted the meeting, and at the same time, it caused a burst of discussion among the parents. The young woman didn't do anything extreme, and the school couldn't forcibly take the crying child away. Therefore, seeing that the head of the year department couldn't communicate with her, the principal could only temporarily stop the meeting. He personally promised the young woman that he would give her a satisfactory explanation after he found out the reason. After the young woman heard the principal's promise, she whispered a few words in the naughty child's ear. It was strange. The naughty child who couldn't be coaxed heard his mother's words, and his originally tragic cries suddenly became sobbing. Is this an Oscar-winning actor? Seeing this, the teachers couldn't help but silently complain in their hearts. Everyone was an adult, so how could they not understand the twists and turns in the story? This woman knew how to use the rules, and at the same time, she understood the principle of the weak defeating the strong. It was obvious how angry the principal was to be involved in such a mess on the first day of school. Therefore, after the principal gave the task of presiding over the meeting to the head of the year department, he quickly walked out of the multimedia classroom with the class teachers. When the parents saw this, they ignored the age director's advice and hurriedly followed the principal out of the multimedia classroom. After confirming that the troublemaker wasn't their child, the parents returned to their seats and discussed the aftermath of the incident. It's so hard to get a place in the capital-affiliated primary school. Looks like there aren't any left. I wonder whose unlucky child this is. Won't father and mother be angered to death this time? After all, today was not even the first day of school. It was just a reporting day, but it turned out to be such a big deal. If nothing unexpected happened, this child who hit someone would probably be treated as an example and expelled directly by the school. Of course, according to the rules of the 9-year compulsory education, schools could not directly expel or dissuade students. But the school could give the students holidays. Other than making things difficult for them, the school had many other ways to make students transfer schools voluntarily. Moreover, today was only the registration day, and the information had not yet been submitted for review. The principal could delete the child's information at any time. Perhaps it was out of sympathy for the loss of a rabbit, but the group of parents immediately decided to repeatedly educate their children in the future. They must not make any mistakes and be expelled from school. Back to the principal. After the group of people arrived at the door of Year 1 Class 2's classroom, they did not directly enter the classroom. Instead, they asked the teacher to go in and call out the troublemaker. Yin obediently followed the teacher out of the classroom. As soon as they stepped out of the door, the naughty child who had been crying nonstop looked as if he had seen his father's murderer. He immediately pointed at Yin and shouted excitedly, "Mother, it's her! She's the one who hit me. Here, it hurts." After saying that, the naughty child raised his head and signaled his mother to see the palm print on his face. He was a child after all, and his skin was very delicate. Although Yin did not use much strength, this slap was still solid and left a faint mark on his face. The young woman saw the palm print on the child's face, but she did not do anything. Instead, she silently looked at the principal. In this case, the principal naturally had to understand the situation first. Therefore, the teacher immediately went forward to explain. This was the capital's affiliated primary school, and all the children were enrolling on the first day. Naturally, the teacher could not be biased. Therefore, when the principal heard the whole story, he immediately agreed with the way the teacher handled it. The teacher did not do anything wrong. If it were any other school or any other teacher facing the situation, they would have done the same. It was wrong to lift the skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit someone. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with the judgment that the person who hit someone should apologize first, and the troublemaker should apologize later. But the problem now was Yin was like a tortoise who ate a scale today. No matter how the teacher communicated with her, She was determined not to admit that she was wrong. And children, in addition to being particularly prone to crying, actually had another characteristic, and that was they were especially stubborn. They were even more stubborn than adults. Standing in front of her was the principal, the young woman holding the naughty child's hand, and the teacher in charge of each class. The teachers said one after another to guide the little fellow. As long as she apologized, the principal obviously would not make things difficult for this 6-year-old child. But unfortunately, Nian Nian did not apologize. She even said in front of the principal that she was determined not to apologize again. "I'm not apologizing. I'm not wrong. The person who lifted my skirt is a pervert. I'm not apologizing to a pervert." Even though she was surrounded in the middle, she did not show any fear on her face. In fact, it was not just the principal who came today. Even if God came, he would not be able to change her mind, because this was a matter of principle that she had repeatedly emphasized to her. Time had smoothed out our edges and corners, and time had eroded our hearts. The 6-year-old Chen Yin had not learned to be flexible. Therefore, her father's words were the truth sword in her hand, and also her stubbornness. Even if the whole world said that you were wrong, it was okay. Her father was here. Seeing that the little fellow was still unwilling to admit her mistake, the principal could only sigh deeply in the end. Then, he turned to the teacher and asked, "Where are the child's parents? Didn't they come out with us?" Hearing this, the teachers could not help but look at each other. They suddenly knew that things were not good. As expected, seeing that the little fellow's parents did not appear, the principal directly said to the teacher in charge of Year 1 Class 2, "Inform her parents, this kind of child, our school can't educate her." Didn't I write it wrong before? So, I'll write it according to my idea. What I want to write is about Nianyan's growth. So, I hope you understand. Under the protection of an eagle will never grow up. Please remember the domain name of this book, 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 432. This kind of child, our school can't educate her. Wasn't the meaning of this sentence clear enough? The principal was trying to dissuade the little girl. Although she was only a 6-year-old child, Nianyan's actions today had already crossed the line. And the worst thing was, no matter how the teacher tried to guide her, Nianyan was determined not to admit that she was wrong. Under these circumstances, even if the principal wanted to give her a chance to repent, he couldn't find a suitable reason to do so. After all, today was only the first day of school and not the usual day of classes. If she really entered the school with this stubborn and violent temper of hers, who knew what kind of trouble she would cause in the future? This was a primary school affiliated to the capital, and at the same time, it was also the top public primary school in the country. He couldn't allow a single rat to spoil the entire pot of soup. The principal repeatedly deliberated for a long time. In the end, he made this seemingly unreasonable decision. Of course, the principal was actually very clear in his heart. For a 6-year-old child, her worldview had yet to be stabilized, so the child's every action was actually carried out according to the daily teachings of the parents. Rather than saying that it was the child's fault, it was more accurate to say that it was the parents' fault. But in the end, the child was the one to take the blame. Nianyan happened to bump into the muzzle of the gun, and because of this, she became the target of the principal's punishment. At this moment, no teacher spoke up to plead for her, and even the homeroom teacher of Year 1 Class 2 was silent. Seeing this, the young woman couldn't help but reveal a trace of satisfaction on her face. She gently touched the naughty child's face, as if hinting to her son, "Look, mother is standing up for you." Seeing that the principal had spoken, the homeroom teacher could only sigh deeply, then turned around and walked to the multimedia classroom, preparing to inform Chen Yin's parents to take the child away. But just as she was about to turn around, Qin Yongyin, who hadn't shown his face all this time, suddenly appeared behind her. Qin Yongyin had already stepped into the diviner realm. Although this level of cultivation couldn't achieve eternal youth, they could still maintain their appearance for decades. In order to not appear too different, Qin Yongyin deliberately made himself look a lot older, thus giving the impression that he was about 40 or 50 years old. With his cultivation level, he naturally knew what was going on outside. Therefore, as soon as he appeared, Qin Yongyan directly walked past the head teacher and came to the little girl. "Ninian, come. Grandpa will take you home." He gently held the little fellow in his arms, and with a little force, the little fellow was lifted up by him. At this moment, the right or wrong of this matter was no longer important. Qin Yongyan respected Chun Shi's teaching methods, so, as long as Ninian believed that she was not wrong, then she really was not wrong. The one who was wrong was the brat and that beautiful woman. At the same time, it was also the school's education method. Isn't it just a small school affiliated to the capital? What's the big deal? Was this the only school in Huaxia? It's okay. Grandpa will change the school for you. Qin Yongyan didn't even bother to greet the principal. Under the gaze of all the teachers, he carried the little fellow and walked straight to the school gate. The little fellow silently lay in Qin Yongyan's arms. After Qin Yongyan carried her out of the school gate, she couldn't help but look back at the school that had driven her away on her first day. In fact, she felt very wronged. But she didn't cry from beginning to end, because her father once said, "You can't cry when you're wronged. If you cry, it means you've lost." There's a group of people waiting to see you make a fool of yourself, especially those who have wronged you. The more wronged and sad you are, the happier and more complacent they will be. Qin Yongyan wasn't Chun Shi, so he didn't want to lower himself to the level of these ordinary people. The only solution he could think of was to change the school and environment for Ninian. Therefore, after walking out the school gate, Qin Yongyan took out his phone and called Wang Chuanju. Wang Chuanju was presiding over a department meeting, so she wouldn't have answered the phone. But she remembered that Qin Yongyan was an antique who didn't even use a cell phone. Something important must have happened if he suddenly called. Therefore, Wang Chuanju immediately stopped the meeting and walked out of the conference room with her phone. What? Transfer Ninian. The capital-affiliated primary school is close to home and the quality of education is good. Why would she want to transfer schools? Wang Chuanju felt that Qin Yongyan's request was very strange, so she repeatedly asked over the phone. Qin Yongyan didn't want to say it first, but he couldn't stand her bombardment of questions, so he had to roughly explain the situation. But unexpectedly, after hearing the story, Wang Chuanju exploded on the spot. Even though they were separated by a door, her roar could be heard clearly in the conference room. What? Ninian was expelled? Who did it? Don't go, I'll be right there. What do you mean I don't care? My granddaughter was bullied, and you want me to do nothing? Brother, I don't want to criticize you, but you really need to change your good temper. It's a good thing that Chun Shi isn't at home now. Otherwise, with his daughter's temper, wouldn't he tear down the school today? Okay, don't say any more, I'll be right there. It had to be said that Wang Chuanju was really efficient. In the time it took Qin Yongyan and the little girl to wait for the bus, she had already rushed over with a group of people. As soon as they got off the bus, Wang Chuanju directly squatted in front of the little girl, then gently hugged her into her arms and patiently asked, "Ninian, tell Grandma, what's going on today?" Perhaps it was because Wang Chuanju was a woman. When the little girl saw her, she immediately pouted and said coquettishly, "Dad said that I'll hit whoever lifts my skirt, but the teacher said that I did something wrong and wanted me to apologize to him." Speaking of this, the little girl suddenly paused, and for the first time, an expression of grievance and sadness appeared on her face. In fact, when everyone said that she was wrong, how could she not have doubted her own actions? After all, she was not some stubborn brat. Although Grandpa said that she did nothing wrong, the little girl still seemed to have some self-doubt, so she could not help but ask doubtfully, "Grandma, was I really wrong?" The so-called right and wrong itself was a subjective meaning. Perhaps as long as Wang Chuanju said that she was wrong, the little girl would immediately change her mind and take the initiative to apologize to the brat. She was very sensible, and it was precisely because she was sensible that she would not be easily persuaded by outsiders. Qin Yongyan was not an outsider, and Wang Chuanju was not an outsider either. So as long as one of them said that she was wrong, the little girl would seriously reflect on it. Fortunately, Wang Chunju did not give her a chance to reflect, but directly carried her up and strode towards the school gate. What wrong? Your grandpa has a soft temper, likes to settle everything peacefully, and is not easily calculated with others. Because of his character, he used to be bullied in the village. So don't learn from him. If you won't learn from your father. Didn't your father often say this? We don't cause trouble, but we're not afraid of trouble either. Whether it's at school or elsewhere, in short, if you fall behind, you'll be beaten. If you're weak, you'll be bullied. So Yin Yin, you must remember, in the future, if anyone dares to lift your skirt, you'll beat him hard for me. Because not only did your father say this, but your grandma also said this. With Wang Chuanju's encouragement, the doubts in the little girl's heart suddenly disappeared, and a smile finally appeared on her face again. Looking at the valiant and high-spirited Wang Chuanju striding into the school gate, Qin Yongyan could only helplessly shake his head at the side. No wonder Qin Xueqing's character was so tough. Wasn't it all because of Wang Chuanju's teaching? The two sisters of the Qin family, Ruo Ying and Lin Qing. One was gentle like water. One was as strong as fire. Who knew? Who would Ninian look more like when she grew up? Please remember the domain name of the book. Nine Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 433. With Wang Chuanju's strong appearance, there was a shocking turn of events. When the principal saw her take out a black ID, he immediately squeezed out a sincere smile on his face. It couldn't be helped. This was the world of adults. Their edges and corners had been smoothed out by time, and the corners of their mouths were raised into sophisticated smiles. Wang Chuanju was really too strong. No one knew what she said to the principal, but in a short while, Yin Yin was led back to the classroom by the class teacher with a smile. Children didn't hold grudges, but when a naughty child saw Yin Yin return to her seat, as if nothing had happened, he couldn't help but have a flash of fear on his face. It was obvious that the naughty child was really afraid of this new classmate who beat him up at the slightest disagreement. Yin Yin was still young, so she didn't understand what Wang Chunju's appearance meant. But the beautiful young woman was very clear that she might have kicked an iron plate today. So when she came out of the principal's office, she hurriedly left the school with the naughty child, as if she didn't want to stay here any longer. As Yin Yin returned to her seat, this farce also came to an end. Other than the naughty child being taken away by his mother, it was as if nothing had happened. And Yin Yin, the freshman who dared to beat someone on the first day of registration, became famous because of this battle. Now, not only did the teachers in the school know that her background wasn't ordinary, even the students looked at her differently when they looked at her. After all, in a class, there were also class bullies other than top students. Fame was earned through fighting. The teachers didn't talk about what happened today, and the children were afraid that they would be the next to be beaten. So from today onwards, Yin Yin was already firmly sitting on the throne of Year 1 Class 2. The teachers of each class took the students to tour the school and let the children familiarize themselves with the school environment. After that, the whole process of registration was over. The little guy was confused the whole day. After dinner, when she made a video call to Chun Shi, she told her father about it. She didn't expect that after Chun Shi heard about it, he repeatedly told her not to hit anyone in the future. As the saying goes, no one knows a son better than his father. Who doesn't know a father better than a son? Children were the closest people to their parents. How could they not be aware of the changes in their parents? Chun Shi's previous education had long been deeply ingrained in Yin Yin's mind. So when he suddenly proposed a completely different education concept at this moment, the little fellow immediately felt a little strange. Because these words were obviously in conflict with what Chun Shi had said before, and it was also completely different from what Grandma had said. Looking at the lifelike Chun Shi in the video, the little girl was a loss. It was as if an error had occurred when a computer was running. The little guy's brain shut down. The child psychologist did not know the real Chun Shi, so he could only guide the little guy in the correct way. But no matter how perfect the imitation was, a fake would always be a fake. Therefore, this seemingly small oversight planted a seed of doubt in the little fellow's heart. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to detect any abnormalities in the short term. But if time passed, by the time the little fellow turned into a little girl, this clumsy lie would probably burst like a bubble. Fortunately, the little fellow was still young. Even if she felt a little strange, she didn't directly question it over the phone. As usual, Chanshi comforted the little fellow, told her a few stories, and coaxed her to sleep. The little fellow nodded. But after hanging up the phone, she didn't seem to be sleepy at all. She turned over and directly leaned against Qin Ruoying. She still felt a little confused, so she leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and told her what she saw and heard today. Unfortunately, her mother was still sleeping quietly. The little fellow blinked and suddenly felt a little cold, so she softly called in the dark, "Big cat." Meow. After hearing her call, the big cat immediately jumped down from the beam and directly got into the little fellow's bed with a few leaps. Feeling the warmth from the big cat, the little guy blinked his eyes and turned to look at the window at the side. Tonight, the moonlight was like water. The moonlight shone through the window on the bedside. The little fellow hugged the big cat tightly and clung to Qin Ruoying. She couldn't help but murmur, "Big cat, where do you think Dad is going?" "Meow, when will he come back?" "Meow, I miss him so much." Perhaps he felt a strong longing in his daughter's heart. Chunshi suddenly woke up from his meditation. Perhaps because he had been meditating for too long this time, the moment he woke up, Chunshi even had the illusion that he was in a courtyard. But then, the endless darkness in front of him made him recognize the reality. Chunshi was still floating in the darkness. Looking at the timer beside him, he found that he had been meditating for as long as 200 years. There was no 60-year cycle in the mountains, and no one knew the year after the winter. Last time, Chunshi was imprisoned for 200 years. When his life was in danger, a light door appeared to save him. Now, another 200 years had passed, and the light door still hadn't appeared. In this regard, Chunshi didn't panic at all. In fact, he had already guessed that the light door might be related to the mysterious woman. If he counted the time on Dragon Head Peak, the mysterious woman had actually saved him twice. Because the difference in their realms was too great, Chunshi could only silently remember the woman's life-saving grace and didn't think about how to repay her. Chunshi watched the woman being dragged away by the chains. Naturally, he couldn't pin his hopes on a mysterious woman to escape. This time, he could only rely on himself. The way to escape was actually very simple. He just needed to enter the Void Realm. After 200 years of meditation, Chunshi was very sure that this dark space was actually not different from the big world. Both were small planes in the cracks of the void. It was just that the big world had been transformed by the grand, pure divine ancestor, so it became a paradise that protected the ancient cultivators. Thinking of this, Chunshi looked around the void. After getting up and stretching his body, he sat down again with his legs crossed. These 200 years were not in vain. He kept thinking about the true meaning of the word void in his mind and successfully found a clue. Chunshi had already understood it, but because of the lack of clinical trials, he couldn't break through to the void realm. The tortoise breathing secret technique allowed him to retain abundant true yuan, so Chunshi now only needed to turn the deduction in his mind into reality. Void realm. Seeing through the void, training the spirit to return to the void. And this was the third level that cultivators had to step on. Please remember the domain name of the book, 9 Heavens Divine Emperor mobile version of reading website. Chapter 434. After 200 years of pondering and deliberating, Chunshi finally grasped the true meaning of the word void that his master once mentioned. What is void? It is the void and also the void, seeing through the void and encompassing all things. Even if you haven't eaten pork, have you not seen a pig run? Chunshi had long known the main characteristics of Dongshu stage cultivators. They can freely travel through the universe, make Sumru mustard bags, and even open up their own small plane in the void. Apart from that, the biggest characteristic of Dongshu stage cultivators is that they are full of energy. Dongshu stage cultivators have reached the peak of their ability to sense and use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Therefore, even if they don't actively guide it, they can easily influence the spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby. Therefore, when Dongshu stage cultivators fight, any technique they use will be much more powerful than before. More importantly, as long as there is spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby, Dongshu stage cultivators will never face the predicament of being exhausted, because the speed at which they breathe in and out spiritual energy is far more than the consumption of their techniques. Therefore, in theory, Dongshu stage cultivators will have the absolute advantage even if they are surrounded by countless Yuanying stage cultivators. If we use gaming terms to describe it, it would be Yuanying stage cultivators can't even break through the defense. How can they hurt Dongshu stage cultivators? Of course, the above is all that Shenshi can see. The significance of Dongshu stage is much more than that. Maybe the mysterious woman left too deep an impression on Shenshi, so after ending the tortoise-like state, Shenshi can no longer calm down. He can't help but think about the process of the woman's appearance. In a trance, Shenshi suddenly understands why he can't see the woman's face or hear her voice. That's because the woman is not in the same plane as him. Everything that Shenshi had seen before was merely a projection of the woman through countless small planes using her supreme magic power to appear in front of him. From the beginning to the end, the woman never really came to the dark space he was in. As for the terrifying aura that came after, Shenshi has reason to suspect. The Great Terror was actually trying to find out the true reason why the woman projected herself into this world. However, the woman had used some unknown method to prevent the Great Terror from discovering his existence. That was how Shenshi managed to survive. The two mysterious experts flashed past Shenxi's eyes like comets, but they left an extremely deep impression on him. Shenshi kept thinking about everything related to the mysterious woman. Purple flames and azure lightning. The mysterious woman had 9 chains. The Great Terror in the depths of the void, as well as his 200 years of contemplation and contemplation. All sorts of seemingly unrelated events converged together, suddenly. Shenshi understood. It was like playing the Ice Bucket Challenge in the middle of winter. When a basin of ice water was poured over his head, he suddenly felt enlightened. The word void was too mysterious. It could be understood as both the void and nothingness. The former meant space, while the latter meant matter. In a dark space, there was only space and no matter. The only matter was himself. Just like the Sumera mustard seed bag, this dark space seemed endless, but in fact, it couldn't be any smaller. Since Shenshi was in the dark space, then he was part of the space, so the space was infinitely large for him. But if he jumped out of the space and looked back at this dark space, how big could it be? It might be as big as the sun or as small as a speck of dust. But all of this, what did it have to do with him? He was no longer a reference object in it, but an observer outside of it. The sun might be big, but as long as he flew out of the solar system, the sun would become a tiny star. Everything was relative. Nothingness and the void. Space and matter. They seemed unrelated, but they were closely related. And this was obviously the so-called true meaning of the word void. Shenshi understood the key, so what he had to do next was to put his thoughts into practice. So, he closed his eyes again. This time, there were no more distracting thoughts in his mind. Understanding and breaking through are two different things. So, when Shenshi opened his eyes again, another 100 years had passed. A full 300 years. Shenshi had finally endured until this moment. Therefore, the moment he opened his eyes, the surging true essence suddenly surged out of his body and then spread out in circles. But then, the true essence was like tentacles and was all pulled back by Shenshi. He was looking for the law threads left behind by the mysterious woman. When people walked through the snow, they would leave a trail of footprints on the snow. Although Shenshi understood the true meaning of the word void, but because there was no spiritual energy in this place, he had not truly broken through to the Dongshu stage. Right now, he could not use his own strength to forcefully break through the void, so he needed to find the door of light that the woman opened for him. The snow melted. The door of light also disappeared, but the law threads that connected the two worlds still existed. Unless the woman personally destroyed it, this thread would forever exist between the two worlds. And this is the first law of heaven and earth that a cultivator must grasp, and also the biggest difference between the Dongshu stage and the Ascended stage. One end is connected to the world, the other end is connected to the dark space. Chun, she could only find this law thread at the moment, because he had once used this law thread to travel between the two worlds. Maybe, when he breaks through again in the future, he will suddenly realize, even in this empty dark space, there were countless densely packed law threads. Every single one of them led to a different place. Chun, she still could not open a new law thread by himself, so he could only rely on the woman's power. He searched and searched and searched. Finally, he found it. To Chun-Shi, this thread could not be any thinner. If he did not understand the true meaning of the word void, he would not be able to sense the existence of this thread in his life. Of course, the so-called thread was just a concept. It actually refers to a cultivator's understanding of the law of heaven and earth. This was the first time Chun-Shi came into contact with the law of heaven and earth. Thus, the moment he discovered this law thread, he was so excited that he started to tremble. Chun-Shi could no longer suppress his excitement and immediately reached out to touch the thread. The moment his finger touched the law thread, a golden light shone. The spirit energy from the world kept pouring out from the golden light. A smile that had not appeared in a long time appeared on Chun-Shi's face. After that, he did not stay any longer and directly turned into a ray of light and entered the golden light. The world. I'm back. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com. The mobile version of the book, .com. Chapter 435. Unlike the previous time, Chun-Shi used his own ability to traverse through the two realms. After he flew out of the golden light, he naturally had a deeper understanding of the law threads. Chun-Shi looked up and saw the same towering trees and lush vegetation on the floating island. The great sun-moon star array dispelled the darkness and brought light to the large world. Everything in front of him was the same as the last time he was here. There seemed to be no changes. But after Chun-Shi looked around the floating island, he suddenly realized that the great sun-moon star array in the sky, which seemed to only be used for illumination, faintly contained strange patterns that even he could not understand. After realizing that something was wrong, Chun-Shi was not in a hurry to find Yuhuan Tianzuan to settle the score. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the ground and looked up at the sky with a serious expression on his face as he observed. The last time he was here, he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he did not feel that there was anything special about this array. Now that he had comprehended the true meaning of the word void, and had even come into contact with the first law of heaven and earth, after careful observation, Chun-Shi suddenly realized that these patterns were not the array patterns that maintained the operation of the array, but a law thread that he had never come into contact with before. The sun-moon star array rotated in unison. 9 stars flew in the sky, 9 palaces in the sky. Chun-Shi looked at the bottom of the floating island thoughtfully. When he saw that the bottom of the floating island was still covered with stars, he suddenly had a guess. This array was not only used for illumination. That was because other than the many law threads above the floating island that guided the movement of the stars, there were also many law threads below the floating island that seemed to be there, but not there. They were silent in the void, like a huge net hanging below the floating island group. If the 120,000 floating islands were considered as a whole, then this array was like 2 huge nets, firmly sandwiching the islands in between. One net had the sun-moon star array hanging on it, called Heaven's Net. The other net was deposited in the void, called Earth's Net. After understanding the mystery, Chun-Shi guessed this formation might be the final trump card left by the grand pure divine ancestor for Tiandu. Once Tiandu faced a life and death crisis, the formation could instantly turn into a murderous formation and wipe out all enemies for Tiandu. Oh, it seems to be very powerful. After confirming the dangers of the Great Formation, Chunshi was still in no hurry to kill his way to Dragon Head Peak. Instead, he randomly grabbed an unlucky fellow on the floating island. Just like the last time, he had a time frame of reference this time, so he quickly found out from the mouth of this unlucky guy it had only been a month since the battle on Dragon Head Peak. In other words, although Chunshi had been in the dark space for 300 years, only a month had passed in the Great World. If the previous 200 years were to be included, then from the time he opened the Gate of Heaven until now, a total of less than 2 months had passed. If Tiandu time was converted to Earth time, it should be about 16 months. December of 1 year. 1 year and 1 April. Nian Yin was already more than 6 years old. Without him and Ying to accompany her this year, he didn't know if this child's birthday was happy. Thinking of this, Chunshi's longing for her suddenly overflowed like the Yellow River, uncontrollable. So, he didn't delay any longer. After casually knocking that unlucky fellow unconscious and throwing him to the side, Chunshi directly sat cross-legged in the air. As he entered a meditative state, the spirit chi of heaven and earth within a radius of 1,000 miles suddenly surged toward him like a tsunami. Under Chunshi's intentional guidance, the spirit chi of heaven and earth suddenly gathered in one place, almost turning into an almost translucent, huge funnel visible to the naked eye. The violent surge of spirit chi set off a huge storm. The storm spread in all directions, instantly causing several large floating islands in the vicinity to tremble. Rumbling noises kept ringing out. The nearby floating islands seemed to have experienced an earthquake. Not only were the residents on the islands terrified, but even the birds and beasts on the islands were so frightened that they scattered and roared. The spirit chi funnel grew larger and larger, and in a short while, it covered all the floating islands within a radius of 100 miles. And the spirit chi on the floating islands covered by the funnel all rushed toward Bicker. The direction of the bickering was exactly where Chunshi was. He was using his own strength, draining the dragon veins of hundreds of floating islands. When the spirit chi of heaven and earth entered the body, there should be a refining process. However, Chunshi was like a large factory at this moment. As long as the spirit chi entered his body, after a few assembly lines of processing, it would completely become a part of his body. The spirit chi surged faster and faster, and the accumulation of vital essence also increased. Chunshi didn't hide his aura at all, so his aura was rising at a speed visible to the naked eye. The early stage of the soul formation realm, the middle stage, the late stage, and then the peak stage. Under such crazy pressure, in just a few breaths' time, the accumulation of vital essence in Chunshi's body had already reached the peak. And as the funnel continued to expand, Chunshi's aura also became stronger and stronger. Chapter 436. Other than Yuhuan, Miao Fa, and Xianzhen, the other celestial venerables had never personally fought with Chen Shi, so their understanding of Chen Shi came from the battle recordings on the Xiantian mirror. The 7 celestial venerables were very knowledgeable, so it was not difficult to discover through the battle recordings, although Chen Shi seemed ferocious at that time, using his own strength to forcefully deal with the siege of 3 Empyreans. During the fight, he had been in a passive state the entire time, basically without any extra strength to fight back. The 3 celestial venerables almost took away half of Chunshi's life, not to mention the 10 celestial venerables present. Therefore, after seeing Yuhuan Tianzuan so excited, the 7 celestial venerables could not help but feel a little puzzled. Looking at Yuhuan's aggressive manner, could it be that he had some personal grudge with that person? The 7 celestial venerables each had their own thoughts. As they pondered over the key points, they followed Miao Fa and Xianzhen to the direction of the dragon drum. The 10 celestial venerables going out to meet the enemy was a grand occasion in divine capital. They did not say that they were not allowed to watch the battle. Therefore, the spectators could no longer suppress the excitement in their hearts. As long as they could fly, they followed the footsteps of the 10 celestial venerables and rushed toward Chun-Shi's location like a swarm of bees. For a moment, as long as the celestial venerables passed by the floating island, it was like a hornet's nest that was lit by a fire. In an instant, countless celestial venerables and above flew out. It had been a long time since the great world was so lively. Densely packed silhouettes continuously flew across the sky above the floating island like a swarm of locusts. The scene was even more shocking than the final battle in the movie Avatar. It had to be said that this troublemaker not only had a high cultivation, but also had courage that far surpassed ordinary people. As the saying goes, where there is life, there is hope. As long as one's cultivation reached the golden core stage and above, one's life was more important than anything else. The cultivation of immortal cultivators was not easy to come by. So, how could they so easily give it up for nothing? What was the difference between Chun-Shi's current actions and courting death? In order to fight back, he sacrificed his life for nothing. How unwise was such an action? Many people could not help but feel sorry for Chun-Shi from the bottom of their hearts. However, even more people were filled with excitement, hoping to witness the fall of a heavenly venerate with their own eyes. With Yuhuan Tianzuan in the lead, the immortal cultivators of the great world quickly arrived at the periphery of the floating islands. The funnel that looked like a canopy of clouds had now turned into a gigantic cloud vortex, enveloping almost all of the floating islands within 1,000 miles. As the heaven and earth spirit Qi continuously flowed into the center of the funnel, the floating island enveloped by the funnel gradually lost its vitality. At this very moment, the cloud vortex above the floating islands was like a ferocious beast from ancient times. Apart from sucking dry all the dragon veins on the floating islands, it also cast a huge psychological shadow on the islanders. This mysterious man who dared to make an enemy of Tiandu had yet to show himself, but the invisible pressure coming from his body weighed down on everyone's hearts like a huge rock. A sense of despair gradually spread through the crowd. It was only after Yuhuan Tianzuan's roar that this huge rock finally fell. Arrogant thief. There's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you insist on coming. Generals of Tiandu, listen to my order. Follow me and set up the soul-capturing formation. This time, we must not let him escape. Yuhuan Tianzuan took the lead and led the 5 divine generals into the cloud vortex like a sharp arrow. His appearance was like a ray of light in the darkness, instantly clearing away the haze in everyone's hearts. The islanders raised their heads to look, and they could not help but reveal an excited expression as if they had just escaped death. In the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan was their spiritual leader. Unlike last time, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not care about his face this time and forced himself to fight Chun-Shi one-on-one. Instead, he assumed a group fighting stance. However, when he rushed into the clouds, he suddenly realized that Chun-Shi's aura seemed to be much stronger than last time. Thinking of this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face could not help but flash a trace of surprise, and a sense of uneasiness arose in his heart. However, when Miaofa and Xianjun arrived, this feeling of uneasiness was thrown out of his mind in the blink of an eye. He was just a defeated opponent. Could it be that he could pierce through the sky today? For safety reasons, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not recklessly rush in alone. He was afraid of falling into Chun-Shi's ambush, so he immediately said to Miaofa and Xianjun, "This person's behavior today is really strange. I'm afraid it's a trap. The two of you, follow me to find out what's going on." Hearing this, Miaofa and Xianjun immediately nodded, then summoned their magic weapons and rushed into the depths of the clouds with Yuhuan Tianzuan side by side. At the same time, Chun-Shi, who was in the center of the vortex, slowly opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, the vortex formed by the spiritual energy above him began to rotate rapidly, and then poured down on him at a speed visible to the naked eye. There was no grand and unique scene of a breakthrough. When the vital essence in Chun-Chi's body accumulated to a certain level, he, who had mastered the true meaning of the word void, naturally broke through to the divine transformation stage, and then directly stepped into the Dongshu stage. The moment Chun-Chi stepped into the Dongshu stage, a faint golden light suddenly lit up on his eyebrows. From afar, it was a bit like when Erlang Shun opened his heavenly eye in the TV series. Then, this golden light gradually converged between Chun-Chi's eyebrows, and then completely disappeared. This was the first law of heaven and earth that he had mastered, also known as the divine mark. Once the divine mark appeared, the Dongshu stage would appear. Chun-Chi deliberately restrained his aura, so Yuhuan Tianzuan did not notice anything strange. When enemies meet, naturally, their eyes would be exceptionally red. Even though they were still far away, the two sides did not even say a word. As the saying goes, my brother Long is ruthless and doesn't talk much. The moment he saw Chun-Chi, Yuhuan Tianzuan viciously threw the jade glaze cup in his hand at him. It was still the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man seeing this. Chun-Chi did not even condense the divine sword dharma power. He directly formed a sword with his fingers, and then slashed at the three lanterns. It was still the first move of the moonlight sword technique. But after this sword slash, it instantly sucked away the little remaining spiritual chi in the surroundings, causing a strange vacuum to appear where the sword slash passed. This was the difference between the divine transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. If the divine transformation stage was compared to nitroglycerin, then the Dongshu stage was obviously nuclear fusion. There was a fundamental difference between the two. Therefore, the moment Chun-Chi's sword slash hit the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man, an explosion that was beyond everyone's imagination occurred. With a loud boom, the three lanterns were sent flying back. The three heavenly lords who were closely related to the three lanterns seemed to have been severely injured, and a strange flush appeared on their faces. Please remember the domain name of this book, Nine Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version website. Chapter 437. Above the Floating Islands. The huge cloud vortex obscured everyone's vision. They did not dare to approach the vortex, so they quietly floated around it. Looking up, the densely packed figures were like a swarm of locusts, almost covering half the sky. Just like the audience in the Colosseum in Rome, these descendants of ancient cultivators did not dare to make any noise, but there was still an inexplicable fanaticism in their eyes. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of a heavenly venerable with their own eyes. But no one expected that in addition to witnessing the fall of a heavenly venerable, they would also be fortunate enough to witness the birth of an ancient legend with the arrival of the three heavenly venerables, Yuhuan, Miaofa, and Xianzhen. A gap was torn in the cloud vortex that covered the sky. The three heavenly venerables were like three sharp arrows with tricolored divine flames on them, as they shot straight at the enemy in the depths of the vortex. For a moment, the golden myriad spirit ancient the purple sky incinerating purple flame, and the grayish-green netherworld ghost flame all bloomed with their own unique brilliance. The three flames intertwined and rose, burning fiercely, almost instantly burning away a large portion of the cloud vortex. At the same time, it also cleared the vision of the spectators. And it was precisely because of this clear vision that everyone witnessed what happened next with their own eyes after the green sword light and the tricolor divine flame collided in the air. It was like a sharp sword piercing through a glass window. It strangely felt like a mirror shattering in the void. Boom! Following a huge explosion, a formless shockwave spread out. Wherever the shockwave went, spiritual energy surged and wreaked havoc. The spectators closer to the center of the battlefield felt as if their chests had been hit by a battering ram. They were actually sent flying by this invisible force just like that. All of you back off. Back off at least 5 kilometers. Divine generals of 5 directions, listen up. No one is allowed to come near this place. Fortunately, there were not only 3 heavenly venerables present today. The 7 heavenly venerables, including Yu Jiang, Tai Hua, and Ing Hua, who had arrived later, saw the intensity of the battle and simultaneously pulled up a protective barrier around the periphery, saving many people in time. Although it was only the first move, the intensity of this battle was far greater than the battle on Dragonhead Peak. Feeling the powerful, true essence fluctuations, the 7 celestial venerables' faces suddenly flashed with a trace of surprise. It was no wonder that Yu Huan would put on such a solemn expression. If it was a one-on-one battle, it was likely that none of the 10 Empyreans present were his match. In a battle between experts, one move was enough to determine the truth. Perhaps in the eyes of that mysterious woman, he should be as insignificant and laughable as these people in front of him, right? The great Tao was endless. There was always a mountain higher than another. If he didn't jump into this small pond, he would never know how high the sky was and how wide the earth was. Thinking of the realm that the mysterious woman might reach, even Shun, she couldn't help but yearn for it. However, yearning was yearning, reality was reality. The reality was Ying was still waiting for him to save her. Nian Yin was still waiting for him to go home. What were they waiting for? Therefore, after seeing the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns take out their life magic treasures, Qinshi couldn't help but smile at them and say, "All of you come together. I'm in a hurry." As soon as his voice fell, a divine sword appeared in his right hand. Then, Chunshi held a sword in one hand and a saber in the other, and took the initiative to rush toward the 10 heavenly sovereigns in front of him. Don't be afraid. Everyone, attack together. This old man really doesn't believe that he can overturn the heavens. Yuan Tianzuan was also a ruthless person. Although he didn't understand why Chunshi was able to defeat heavenly sovereign Yang Yin in one move, he didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, when he saw Chunshi make a move, he took the lead to face him. It was still the same 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man combined attack. But this time, they were not facing Chunshi, who was at the peak of the semi-god realm. It was Chunshi, who was at the early stage of the void transformation realm and already had killing intent in his heart. I've already given you a chance. It's you who didn't cherish it. Then don't blame me for being ruthless. After saying that, Chunshi couldn't help but let out a long roar towards the sky, and the sword in his hand suddenly glowed with a faint cold light. The third move of the combination of sword and saber. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse of heaven and earth could be shattered. Chapter 439. 3 styles of saber, 3 styles of sword. 3 styles of saber and sword. 3 styles of endless, 9 styles of returning to one. As soon as he finished speaking, Chunshi held the sword in his right hand and the saber in his left. With a shocking momentum, he charged toward the 10 celestial sages not far away. At this moment, one of the 10 celestial sages was injured. Although the remaining 9 were a little worried about the strength that Chunshi had shown before, after being provoked and provoked by Chunshi again and again, the 9 celestial sages were obviously completely provoked. Evil thief, don't be so arrogant. This is the hinterland of Tiandu, under the shadow of the divine ancestor. How can you be so presumptuous? Everyone, let's take him down together. By Su Qingtian's order. As Yuan Tianzuan's words fell, the 9 of them no longer cared about their identity and almost simultaneously took out their famous natal magic treasures. As various magic treasures flew out of their hands, the field suddenly shone brilliantly, showing the mighty divine power. Seeing that the battle was about to start, even the 5 divine generals, whose strength was second only to the celestial sages, retreated 10 miles away at this moment, not daring to take half a step forward. After all, this was a battle of the celestial sages. It was also the first time that the 10 celestial sages had joined forces to deal with one person. Therefore, no matter the result, today's battle was enough to be called unprecedentedly brilliant. Perhaps it was to make this battle more legendary. The moment Chun-Shi raised the saber and sword in his hand, even time seemed to stop flowing, and everything in the void was silent. The third style of the divine skill, combination of saber and sword. The saber is formless. The sword is formless. The vast expanse shatters heaven and earth. When he was still in the heavenly jade world, Chun-Shi had already used this move. However, at that time, he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he could only force the move with a huge amount of vital essence. At this moment, Chun-Shi finally stepped into the insightful void realm. Therefore, when he used this move again, he suddenly had a different feeling in his heart. It turned out that this move actually involved the application of the laws of heaven and earth, and could only be smoothly used by those above the insightful void realm. The saber is formless. The sword is formless. Its purpose was to shatter heaven and earth. Chun-Shi swung the sword and saber in his hand, and endless saber and sword chi burst out in the void. Aura fluctuations could not be concealed, so the celestial venerables immediately felt that there seemed to be thousands of swords slowly forming in front of him. However, when they focused their gazes, they did not find anything strange. That was because this move had chi but was formless. It was exactly the same as that sentence. The blade was formless and the sword was formless. The chi of the saber and sword, which contained the essence of the word void, was like a huge net in the void, suddenly covering the 9 celestial venerables. The 9 celestial venerables did not notice anything strange. Only when the net of chi from the saber and sword came crashing down did everyone realize that they had fallen into Chun-Shi's trap. There was almost no warning. It was as if they had stepped into a void, and there was no end to their surroundings. Yuan Tianzuan tried to struggle, but found that he couldn't. It was as if he was trapped by something invisible. Seeing this, Yuan Tianzuan couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. He quickly mobilized all the true chi in his body, trying to forcibly break free from the shackles. However, at this moment, his body suddenly felt pain, and countless bloody marks suddenly burst out all over his body. As if falling into a red dye vat, the 9 celestial venerables' clothes were instantly soaked with blood. Even with the protection of treasures, it was difficult for them to withstand the power of this move, because this move was simply unpredictable and impossible to dodge. It was hidden in the void. If one did not comprehend the essence of the word void, it was basically impossible to detect it. And this was the terrifying part of the third divine skill, turning nothingness into something. The world was filled with saber and sword chi, formless and formless. At this moment, it was a flower. At that moment, it was a bird. At the next moment, it was a scorching sun in the sky. From the perspective of a bystander, it was as if nothing had happened. However, the 9 celestial venerables' bodies were oozing blood very strangely. Just as everyone was feeling a little puzzled, Yuan Tianzuan suddenly looked up to the sky and let out a fierce howl. Then he gritted his teeth and ignited a drop of blood essence in his body. One had to admit that this old man did have some eyesight. Once he saw that the situation was not right, he actually directly put on a desperate posture. At the price of burning his blood essence, he forcefully tore a gap in Chun-Shi's saber and sword chi net. After escaping, Yuan Tianzuan did not waste any time. He directly recalled the Jade World Glazed Cup and then used the ancient spirit Yi to save the few celestial venerables beside him. Looking at Yuan Tianzuan, who was covered in blood chi, a trace of shock appeared on Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's face. Hearing that, Yuan Tianzuan did not immediately reply. Instead, he looked at Chun-Shi with eyes full of resentment. This person is not the same as before. He must have had some fortuitous encounter and stepped into the legendary Supreme stage. This sentence was like a bucket of cold water poured over their heads, instantly extinguishing the burning battle intent in their hearts. As the Jade Universe Glazed Cup flew out of his hand, the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying Formation, which had been greatly weakened due to Celestial Venerable Sunblaze's absence, immediately fell apart. At this time, Chun-Shi seemed to have expected this. He suddenly forced Wondrous Spell Heavenly Lord back with a slash of his saber. Then he decisively pulled back his sword, allowing the sword that had been accumulating power for a long time to point directly at Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan only saw a cold light flash before his eyes. He didn't even have time to defend himself before the sword pierced through his protective aura and through his body, drawing a long line of blood in the air. Pooh! After suffering such a heavy blow, Yuhuan Tianzuan lost his ability to fight on the spot and instantly fell from the sky. If Heavenly Lord Inghua hadn't reacted quickly and caught him in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would have fallen directly into the endless void below. The formation has been broken. We are in danger. Everyone, quickly retreat to the Imperial Hall and regroup. We will wait for an opportunity. Go quickly. I will stop him. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell was indeed somewhat courageous. Seeing that the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying Formation had collapsed due to Yuhuan Tianzuan's injuries, he advanced instead of retreating. He held the 8 Views Palace Lantern and brazenly faced Chun-Shi. However, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was only at the early stage of soul formation, couldn't block Chun-Shi, who was at the early stage of void transformation, even if he burned his blood essence. Thus, in the instant that the other 7 people turned around and flew away with Yuhuan Tianzuan, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was covering for them, was struck by Chun-Shi's sword. As a result, he fell from the sky and heavily smashed into the floating island below. A 1,000-mile journey collapsed because of an ant's nest. Because of Yuhuan Tianzuan's momentary mistake, the 10 Directions Celestial Lords were instantly defeated. In gaming terms, that would be, the configuration of their formation was too low, and a margin for error was almost zero. A single mistake would instantly cause them to be wiped out. After Chun-Shi defeated Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, he didn't rush to finish him off. Instead, he immediately chased after the 8 fleeing Celestial Lords. Seeing this, Heavenly Lord Yujiang, who was the strongest among them, decisively stepped forward and replaced Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell to cover for everyone. However, Chun-Shi was like a madman who had gone berserk. As soon as the 2 of them met, Heavenly Lord Yujiang was slashed down by his sword and fell straight into the void below. Wondrous Spell and Yujiang fell one after another. Even if they excluded the heavily injured Yuhuan, there were still 6 people left. Thus, Heavenly Lord Xuanjin stepped forward. They couldn't delay for too long, but this method of covering the rear greatly lengthened the battle line. As a result, after Chun-Shi repelled Xuanjin with his sword, Dragonhead Peak appeared not far in front of them. At this moment, Chun-Shi didn't need to think with his but to know. They were going to activate the Great Sun-Moon Star Formation. Since this formation was the final killing move that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had left behind for Tian Capital, it must have its unique features. Chun-Shi didn't think that he was a match for the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, so he deliberately lured everyone to the periphery of the floating islands. His goal was to make the 10 Heavenly Venerables stay away from the Imperial Polarity Hall and prevent them from activating the formation at any time. Chun-Shi had achieved his goal. However, he still didn't expect the 10 Heavenly Venerables, who held high positions, would have the courage to burn their blood essence and sacrifice themselves at the same time. Xuanjin fell. Inghua stepped forward again. The Heavenly Venerables, who used to be high and mighty, fell one after another, but the remaining few stood up resolutely and continued to cover the rear for their companions. Although they couldn't block 1 or 2 moves from Chun-Shi, they could create some obstacles for Chun-Shi and buy some time for everyone to escape. When only 3 heavenly venerables were left beside Yuan, the group of 4 finally flew to Dragonhead Peak. For Tian Capital, for the divine ancestors' reputation. Go, Yuan. We'll do our best to buy time for you. A fierce look flashed across the Tai Hua heavenly venerable's face. Then, he and the other 2 heavenly venerables turned to face Chen Shi, who was chasing after them with a sword. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but yell fiercely, "Get lost!" The battle was coming to an end. As long as the 3 people in front of him were defeated, Tian Capital would have no chance of counterattacking. Therefore, Chen Shi no longer held back and decisively used his killing move. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and a vast expanse could shatter the universe. The sound came with the sword, its momentum unparalleled. The 3 heavenly venerables with the lowest cultivation didn't even have time to scream before they were completely pulverized by the billions of saber lights and sword shadows. However, it was also because they risked their lives to stop Yuan Tianzun successfully flew to the front of the Imperial Polarity Hall. As soon as he landed, Yuan Tianzun suddenly let out a long howl and slammed his palm into the center of the square. In an instant, the entire floating island trembled violently. Feeling the tremors from Dragonhead Peak, Yuan Tianzun couldn't help but tremble with excitement. After tens of thousands of years of silence, the array pattern that the divine ancestor personally engraved on the square finally showed its brilliance to the world. Divine ancestor above, the Emperor's majestic North Tower, the divine ancestor's vast kindness shakes the southern sky. Fortunately, we did not disappoint you. Chapter 442. As Yuan Tianzun slammed his palm down, the formation runes engraved on the plaza began to glow. Just as Chen Shi had expected, this formation was indeed the final killing move left behind by the Pure Sky Saint ancestor for Tiandu. Ever since the Pure Sky Saint ancestor led the ancient cultivators to build Tiandu, this formation had been engraved on Dragonhead Peak. But what was strange was that the ancient books left behind by the Pure Sky Saint ancestor did not record any description of this formation, so no one knew what this formation was used for. Perhaps it was an illusion formation, perhaps it was a killing formation. In short, it should not be activated unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, it was important to mention something important. It was not that Shanxi did not want to stop the formation from activating, but that he could not stop it at all. Unless he could kill the 10 Celestial Venerables in one move, the 10 Celestial Venerables would activate the formation at the most dangerous moment. This was a paradox in itself. After all, the formation carried Tiandu's last hope and was also the foundation of Tiandu's standing in the great world. Just like playing cards, when Yuan Tianzun lost everything, he would naturally place his hopes on this trump card. And now, it was time to reveal this trump card. It had to be said that this trump card was indeed somewhat extraordinary. As the formation runes on the plaza appeared one after another, the great sun-moon star formation above the floating islands suddenly dimmed a lot, and the entire great world fell into darkness. Seeing this, Shinshi could not help but be on guard and carefully analyze the changes in order to find the location of the formation's life gate as soon as possible. Whether it was an illusion formation or a killing formation, there would usually be 2 life and death gates when setting it up. On one hand, it was to prevent the formation from covering their allies, and, on the other hand, it was convenient for the person setting up the formation to enter and exit the formation. But what made Chun Shi feel a little strange was the formation in front of him did not seem to have 2 life and death gates. As soon as the formation was activated, one after another, flickering lines of law slowly appeared in the void. Even if Yuan Tianzun had not grasped the true meaning of the word void, he could still see these lines of law with his naked eye. Of course, in Yuan Tianzun's eyes, these lines of law were just waves of vital essence. The lines of law crisscrossed in the void. From afar, It looked like a large net covering the entire great world. Then, these lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands became fish and shrimps in the net. At the same time, the soul mirror stored in the Imperial Hall suddenly released a dazzling golden light and flew to the center of the plaza with a whoosh. The formation runes in the center was a circular shape with a circular hole in the middle. After the soul mirror flew, it directly landed on the circular hole. Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan stared blankly at everything before him. Although the formation to Tianzun was it to the sky, to it to was. However, just as he was absent-minded, the soul mirror actually automatically combined with the formation patterns. Immediately after, an extremely intense, true essence fluctuation erupted and actually blasted Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan flying far away all of a sudden. Something unexpected happened. The great world. The 120,000 floating islands began to shake violently under the influence of an unknown force. The spirit energy on the floating islands originated from the dragon veins on the various islands, but now, these dragon veins were like a volcanic eruption, gushing out and gathering at the peak of Dragon Head Peak. The spirit energy surged crazily in one place, and for a moment, it caused an unprecedented spirit energy tide in the great world. Seeing this, Chunshi no longer cared about snatching the soul mirror and turned to leave the center of the storm that had yet to form. But what he didn't expect was, even though he had already stepped into the insightful emptiness realm, he was still like a 3-year-old child in front of the Grand Pure One's laws. He couldn't use brute force to tear open this gradually tightening net. The inescapable net formed by the lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands gathered in one place. The floating islands in the center were still fine, as there was still some space between them, so no collisions occurred. But the floating islands at the edge were in trouble. Many of the floating islands were pushed by the net, and they collided with the nearest floating islands. The scene was so tragic that it was like a serial car accident on the highway. In an instant, mountains collapsed, the earth cracked, and rocks flew. The residents on the islands were howling in grief. This, after seeing the tragic situation at the periphery of the floating islands, Yu Huan Tianzun felt a chill run down his back, and his heart was filled with inexplicable fear. He would never have thought the formation left behind by the Grand Pure One was not to defend against enemies, but to destroy Heaven Capital's foundation. Grand Pure One. Could this be the last hope you left for Heaven Capital? Hope? Ha ha ha! Seeing the floating islands in the distance continuously colliding and sinking, Yu Huan Tianzun was filled with despair. He wanted to use this opportunity to turn the tables, but who would have thought the result would be like this? After receiving such a blow, Yu Huan Tianzun suddenly seemed to have gone crazy, and he couldn't help but sit at the edge of the square and laugh wildly. Once the Grand Pure Saint Ancestors' Sun-Moon Star formation was activated, all the objects in the large world would be gradually wrapped up in an inescapable net and stuffed into a white hole. Then, through the white hole, these objects would be sent to another unknown world. She didn't want to be sent to some strange place again. Therefore, when he realized the true function of the formation, he used all his strength and began to struggle madly. In any case, he was at the Domshu stage. Thus, his efforts played a certain role in the end. As a result, he was able to successfully go against the current and arrive at the border of the Heavenly Network. The Heavenly Network was formed by the threads of law. She tried to touch it, but realized that these laws weren't something he could control at his current stage. Therefore, he immediately took out the sword in his hand and tried to tear this large net apart with brute force. However, no matter how hard he tried, the large net didn't budge. And as the inescapable net tightened, by the time most of the 120,000 floating islands had been swallowed up, Chun, she was like a fish in a net. She could only watch in despair as she was continuously dragged towards the white hole by the large net. F***CK? After some time, when Chun-Shi regained consciousness, he realized that he was in an unfamiliar vacuum environment. This vacuum environment was different from the dark space Chun-Shi had been in before. There were radiation, magnetic fields, rays, and various dust impurities that Chun-Shi was familiar with here. He calmed himself down and looked up. To his surprise, there was a gigantic planet beside him. This, Chun-Shi was shocked. He immediately flew out of the rubble and came to the star belt of this planet. Earthlings grew up looking at pictures of the 8 major planets in the solar system. Thus, Chun-Shi recognized it at a glance. This gigantic planet with a ring around it was none other than Saturn. Had he returned to the solar system? Thinking of this, Chun-Shi was suddenly excited. He quickly flew out of the star belt and went straight to the periphery of Saturn. A bright red star entered Chun-Shi's eyes, the sun. It really was the sun. The final trump card that the Tai Ching ancestor left for Heaven Capital was actually a teleportation array that led directly to the solar system. Chun-Shi looked back and saw that the 120,000 floating islands had all turned into ruins and were completely merged in a Saturn star belt. Yuan Tianzuan's aura was still there. Except for Taihua and the other 2 who were killed by Chun-Shi, the auras of the remaining 7 heavenly venerables were still there. They did not die because of the activation of the array. However, while the 10 heavenly venerables were fine, the residents of the great world were in trouble. But he didn't expect that the moment his spirit entered the mirror, it was as if Chun-Shi's soul had been sucked away by the soul mirror, causing him to lose all sense of the outside world. His divine sense entered the soul mirror. It was only then that this connate supreme treasure truly displayed its uniqueness. There was a strange consciousness space within the soul mirror, which was also the place where Xian Nu's soul was stored. As soon as Chun-Shi's consciousness entered the soul mirror, he felt as if he'd fallen into the yellow springs or the river Styx. He was surrounded by dense resentment that refused to dissipate. Perhaps his arrival had disturbed the Een souls that had been imprisoned here for many years, so much so that the resentment of these Een souls was like bats in a bat cave, and they actually rushed towards him in groups. Chun-Shi couldn't help but snort angrily when he saw this. The spiritual pressure of a Dongshu cultivator immediately spread out. Arbiter Xian Nu's cultivation wasn't high to begin with. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was an ordinary person. So how strong could her soul be? Een souls didn't have consciousness, but they still retained their instincts to seek good fortune and avoid calamity. Thus, when Chun-Shi released his aura, the Een souls scattered like frightened birds and beasts, not daring to approach him at all. One had to know that the soul mirror and the real world were 2 completely different concepts. The soul mirror was somewhat similar to a cultivator's sea of consciousness. In this space, the 5 senses were useless. They could only sense each other through their souls. And in Chun-Shi's perception, in this mysterious and strange soul mirror, there was a faint fluctuation of soul that he was extremely familiar with. Although it was very weak, like a grain of gold in a vast sea of sand, Chun-Shi was still able to sense its existence immediately. This was the throbbing of the soul. It was also the bond between 2 people who truly loved each other. One look, and they could see each other. One step was like a heavy city. Love was separated by mountains and seas. The mountains and seas couldn't be leveled. There were boats to cross the seas. There were roads to cross the mountains. This love overturned the mountains and seas. The mountains and seas could be leveled. Chun-Shi suddenly looked over. He felt as if there was someone waiting for him in the depths of his sea of consciousness. Thus, he rushed forward without hesitation. Along the way, all the Een souls avoided him. Only the fluorescent light still floated silently in the same place. In the blink of an eye, Chun-Shi arrived at the position of the fluorescent light. Is it you? I'm here to pick you up." As he spoke, he tried to reach out to the fluorescent light. However, he completely forgot that he was in a space similar to the heart aperture. There was no way he could directly touch the other party. The fluorescent light couldn't give Chun-Shi any response. But from Chun-Shi's point of view, there was no need to say anything more. Ying was right in front of him. As long as he brought this fluorescent light back to Earth, Ying would naturally wake up. Their family could also be reunited. Thinking of this, Chun-Shi was suddenly very excited. Thus, he immediately used his powerful soul to gently envelop the fluorescent light. Then, he tried to bring it out of this damned soul mirror. But at this time, Chun-Shi suddenly realized this space seemed to only allow entry and not exit. There was no way out. However, after thinking about it for a while, he quickly felt relieved. After all, the spirit mirror was used to store Xian-Yin's souls. How could they escape so easily? If there was no exit, he could just open one himself. Speaking of which, it was strange. Ever since Chun-Shi's soul entered the spirit mirror, he completely lost his sense of his physical body. It was as if his physical body and soul were separated. Seeing this, Chun-Shi didn't panic at all. At this moment, he had already stepped into the Paradise Void stage and had grasped the essence of the word void. It was just an ownerless object. So what if it was a Khanate cardinal treasure? Could it be that they could really trap him to death here? Thus, Chun-Shi immediately abandoned all distracting thoughts and tried to establish a connection with his physical body. Perhaps it was his efforts that had worked. Not long after that, the physical body that he had left on the outskirts of Saturn sat down in mid-air with its legs crossed, as if it were an electrified robot. At the same time, it began to inject its own energy into the soul mirror. The spirit mirror was not Chun-Shi's magic treasure, and it didn't have an instruction manual. Therefore, he could only rely on his experience to determine that activating the spirit mirror required a huge amount of true core. Chun-Shi originally planned to activate the spirit mirror to release the imprisoned Xian-Yin souls. With him watching over the Xian-Yin souls, no accidents would happen after the spirit mirror released the Xian-Yin souls. However, Chun-Shi never thought that, as he continued to inject true core into the spirit mirror, an extremely powerful energy fluctuation suddenly erupted from the spirit mirror. Then, under the influence of this unknown energy, the huge Saturn began to rotate in the opposite direction along the planet's orbit. He lowered his head and saw that the soul mirror was still in his hands. However, the previously dull surface of the mirror now faintly rippled with circles of ripples. Seeing this, Chun-Shi was shocked and quickly withdrew his true essence. He withdrew his true essence. But unfortunately, however, the soul mirror continued to operate. At this moment, Chun-Shi suddenly realized, in addition to Saturn, even Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, and Uranus began to rotate in the opposite direction under the influence of this unknown force. Among them, Venus and Mercury, which were closer to the Sun, suddenly accelerated their revolutions and converged with the Earth in a straight line. With the exception of Earth, the 8 planets all changed their respective orbital speeds and directions, converging into a straight line at a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant, the alignment of 9 stars, a sudden phenomenon. After 10,000 years, this peerless formation set up by the Tai-Ching divine ancestor was finally revealed to the world in its entirety. Even the great formation of sun, moon, and stars in the great world was actually only one of its subformations. The moment the alignment of 9 stars occurred, a large nomological net formed by the laws of heaven and earth vaguely appeared at the boundary of the solar system. This was something that had to be mentioned, the boundary of the solar system, which was the place where the sun's gravity could cover. There were as many as 100 billion comets there. These comets were gathered together by the sun's gravity, thus forming a spherical cloud, which was also known as the Oort cloud by scientists. If one were to look at it in another way, The Oort cloud could be seen as the atmosphere, and the comets within it could be seen as droplets of water vapor in the atmosphere. The moment the nomological net appeared, Chun-Shi was completely stunned. This large net was somewhat similar to the inescapable net in the Great World, but it contained nomological attributes that Chun-Shi could not understand at all. One had to know that she had already stepped into the insightful void realm. However, when he saw this scene, he still felt a sense of loss and helplessness in his heart. It was like a primary school student trying to solve a calculus problem in university mathematics. The moment he saw those densely packed numbers and symbols, Chun-Shi was completely stunned. These were all left behind by the Tai Ching divine ancestor. The solar system was not like the Great World. The area of 120,000 floating islands added together was at most equivalent to the area of Asia. But what about the solar system? Even if one flew at the speed of light, it would take an entire year to fly to the boundary of the solar system. And this was only the radius of the solar system. The more you know, the more you can recognize your own insignificance. To the current Chun-Shi, this sentence had become the supreme truth.